Chapter 3:15. Fight and Kill? After hearing Chun Shi's words, Lin Xian's expression darkened, as if something had touched her heart. Seeing her hesitant look, Chun Shi was a little puzzled. Thus, after pondering for a while, he smiled and explained, "Actually, practicing martial arts is quite easy. If you really want to learn, I can teach you. You can just treat it as if you're practicing Tai Chi." Chun Shi's idea was very simple. He could casually teach Lin Xian some basic Qi refining methods. It could strengthen her body and extend her life. At the same time, it could give her more means of self-defense. This could also prevent her from encountering something similar to last night. After all, to a normal person, it would take a lot of mental fortitude to endure 2 kidnappings. After Chun Shi's suggestion, Lin Xian didn't immediately reply. Instead, she turned her head to look at Yingying and Nianyan, who were playing not far away. Looking at this classmate, friend, and best friend who was already a mother, and then looking at the lively and cute little fellow beside her, Lin Xian suddenly felt an indescribable bitterness in her heart. She always felt that Yingying was like Mr. Chao Shuichen's description in Dream of the Red Chamber. When she's quiet, she's like a beautiful flower shining on the water. When she moves, she's like a weak willow swaying in the wind. The heart has one more orifice than the body, and the sickly Shizi wins by 3 points. Although Yingying usually looked weak, she was definitely not a pretentious woman. She was gentle, low-key, and reserved. If it wasn't for that beautiful face, it would be easy for people to overlook her existence. After so many years, in Lin Xian's impression, the only time Yingying showed off her ability was probably when she publicly rejected Zhao Yuan's love and threw herself into Chun Shi's arms. At that moment, not to mention Chun Shi, even she, a woman, was stunned by Yingying's actions. Speaking of which, it was laughable. It was also from that moment onwards that she truly began to notice Chun Shi. This piece of gold that had yet to shine. Lin Xian stood there in a daze as memories of the past flooded his mind. For a moment, he actually stood there in a daze. Chun Shi thought that she was thinking, so after a while, he asked with a smile, "What do you think? Would you like to learn?" Chun Shi's voice pulled Lin Xian back from his chaotic thoughts. She glanced at Chun Shi with a slightly panicked expression before replying, "When are you going back to Shangjing?" "Soon, probably within the next few days. Nianyan is going to kindergarten. It's time to bring her back to get used to it." "Oh." Lin Xian went silent again. She buried her head and didn't speak for a long time. Because she was half a head shorter than Chun Shi, if Chun Shi didn't use his divine sense, he naturally wouldn't be able to see the expression on her face. Lin Xian was indeed a bit strange today. Chun Shi looked at her in confusion. He wondered if what happened last night had triggered her. So he began to think about how to help her get rid of this shadow. But just as Chun Shi was puzzled, Lin Xian suddenly said this earth-shattering sentence, "Chun Shi, I like you." Her voice was very soft, almost inaudible. But how sensitive was Chun Shi's ears? So after hearing her words, Chun Shi couldn't help but frown. What shouldn't have come finally came. Chun Shi took a step back without leaving a trace. After putting some distance between Lin Xian and himself, he began to think about how to answer her. At this time, Lin Xian suddenly started to cry. Like a frightened ostrich, she buried her head even deeper. As the strong sense of guilt gushed out from the bottom of her heart, she could no longer hold back her tears and they slid down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I like you. Just like how the wind flies for 8,000 miles without asking when it will return. Was it wrong to like someone? It was wrong. It was a big mistake. Because she liked a married man, and this man was also her best friend's husband. Mistake upon mistake. But was this really her fault? Actually, the trajectory of fate had changed the moment Chun Shi came back. If it wasn't for the accidental encounter that day, perhaps she would have accepted Li Shouwen's pursuit. After all, how could she not be curious about a man who could make such an outstanding woman like Yingying fall in love with him? It was this damned curiosity that made her sink deeper and deeper. There was nothing wrong with liking someone. Liking someone you shouldn't be liking, that was wrong. Lin Xian was very clear about this, so she had always carefully kept her heart in the corner, hoping that one day when she took it out again, there would be no trace of that person left behind. When you like someone, but you have to bear the pain and bitterness by yourself, she had already made a big mistake. In fact, it was not difficult to realize that one was wrong. It was just that this mistake was harder to correct than one would expect. From the encounter in the shop window, to the fire in the unfinished building, from the short time they spent together at the wedding, to the despair and helplessness she felt when she was lying on the altar. Just when she was most afraid, she broke through the door, at that moment. Just like how she opened the curtains in the morning, the bright and beautiful sunlight shone directly into the darkest corner of her heart. The originally blurry figure gradually became clearer in Lin Xian's heart. This also made her unable to see anything else. Everything in the world was overshadowed. In her eyes, there was only the figure that she yearned for day and night. Finally, Lin Xian couldn't control herself anymore. At this moment, she spilled out her heart that had been hidden for a long time. "I'm sorry, I like you." Like a primary school student who made a mistake, Lin Xian lowered her head and apologized to Chen Shi again. Her voice sounded like she was about to cry, but at the same time, there was a bit of sadness, pain, and bitterness. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have disturbed you. When you fell in love with someone you shouldn't have, even a confession would become a mistake." Chen Shi finally understood why Lin Xian was absent-minded today. He silently looked at Lin Xian. After a long silence, Chen Shi said with a serious face, "Don't say sorry, there's nothing wrong with liking someone." At this point, Chen Shi couldn't help but turn his head to look in Qin Ruoying's direction. At this time, Qin Ruoying seemed to have sensed something, so she raised her head and looked at Chen Shi from afar. But then, Qin Ruoying suddenly smiled and nodded slightly at Chen Shi. They didn't have the wings of a colorful phoenix, but their hearts were connected. After getting the approval of his wife, Chen Shi coughed lightly and continued to say to Lin Xian, Xian, you're a good girl. But you can't spoil things like feelings. Actually, I think you should open your heart and look at the world in another way. That way, you will have new discoveries, and not like now, where you lock yourself in a small room. If I really want to say sorry, I should be the one saying it. I'm sorry, I don't know what I should say now." Looking at Lin Xian, who kept her head down and didn't speak, she couldn't help but laugh awkwardly after saying a lot of chicken soup for the soul. "This kind of thing really gives me a headache." She really didn't know what to say. The wind in the park blew gently, and the two were speechless. After a while, Lin Xian suddenly raised her head and sniffed gently. She forced a smile on her face and said, "I'm sorry, I forgot myself. There's nothing wrong with liking someone, but I did something wrong. My mistake was that I shouldn't have said it out loud, because it would make me seem selfish and completely disregard other people's feelings. I'm sorry. I hope you guys don't mind." She said, "You guys," so this apology was obviously meant for Qin Ruoying. When Chen Shi heard this, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and quickly said, "It's fine. I have a bad memory? Haha." Lin Xian was amused by his silly look. The moment she laughed, she was like a lotus flower at the beginning of the summer rain, beautiful beyond compare. "Thank you. I thought it through. Feelings are actually like what you just said. You can't spoil them." Speaking of this, Lin Xian reached out and tucked the scattered hair behind her ear. Then, as if nothing had happened, she smiled at Chen Shi and said, "I have something to do later, so I won't accompany you guys today. I'll leave first." "Okay, be careful when you drive. Goodbye." "Goodbye." After smiling and waving at Chen Shi, Lin Xian turned around and quickly walked away. But after taking a few steps, she suddenly turned around and asked Chen Shi loudly, "Hey, Chen Shi, are we still friends?" This question, Li Xiaowen just asked her yesterday. So when Lin Xian couldn't help but ask Chen Shi the same question, the smile on her face suddenly froze. But fortunately, Chen Shi didn't disappoint her. "Of course, you're one of the few friends Ying and I have. Be careful on the road. If anything happens, call me." "Thank you." After hearing Chen Shi's affirmative answer, Lin Xian couldn't help but smile happily. But when she turned around, her vision instantly blurred. Bean-sized teardrops gushed out crazily like a flood that had broken through a dam. After Lin Xian's figure disappeared from sight, Qian Shi silently retracted his divine sense and then came to Qin Ruoying's side. The husband and wife stood side by side and quietly watched the naughty little guy run around the park. This kind of thing should be reported to his wife, but Qian Shi really didn't know where to start. Qin Ruoying seemed to sense his strangeness, so she took the initiative to reach out her right hand and gently held Qian Shi's left hand. I know, Xian didn't do it on purpose. Hearing this, Qian Shi couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying with slight surprise, but he only saw Yingying's peaceful smile. Didn't do it on purpose. Just these 5 simple words, but unconsciously pointed out a lot of important things. Sure enough, Yingying was as low-key, smart, virtuous, and considerate as always. Thinking of this, Qian Shi couldn't hold it in anymore and kissed her heavily in front of everyone. Immediately, Qin Ruoying's face was filled with disgust as she said coquettishly, "Annoying! I still like you very much, like the wind that flies 8,000 miles, not asking when it will return." Chapter 316. 3 days later. Because of her bad mood, Lin Xian took a week of sick leave and didn't go to work recently. Mental illness was also an illness, and there was no cure for it. Therefore, for most of the 3 days, she just hugged her legs and sat quietly on the sofa in a daze. She didn't turn on the lights, and the curtains were tightly drawn. Only in the darkness could she find a trace of warmth. Although she had never been in love, the lingering disappointment and sadness still lingered in her heart. She didn't want to think about it, but she couldn't control herself. She couldn't help but think of that figure, and that was why she was in so much pain. Time passed by just like that. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Ding dong. Lin Xian was shocked. She thought that her dream had come true, so a trace of joy immediately appeared on her face. When you missed someone in your heart, you knew that it was impossible, but the moment you opened the door, you would still hope that the person behind the door would be the one you thought about day and night. And it was just a kind of self-deception, so she quickly came back to her senses. After all, why would Qian Shi come to her house for no reason? Who was knocking on the door? Lin Xian glanced outside through the peephole and saw a middle-aged man in a black suit standing outside the door with a serious face. Who is it? For safety reasons, Lin Xian didn't open the door immediately. Instead, she asked through the door. "Miss Lin, hello? My name is Qin Shui. I'm Mr. Chen's friend. He asked me to pass something to you." Huh? Lin Xian looked through the peephole repeatedly for a while. After confirming that Qin Shui didn't look like a bad person, she opened the door a little. Qin Shui was tactful. After passing the file in his hand to Lin Xian through the security door, he immediately took a step back and said, "Miss Lin, Mr. Chen might not have mentioned me to you. You can take a look. This is my business card. I was asked by Mr. Chen to call you no matter what difficulties you encounter in the future. I think I should be able to help." "All right, thank you. Sorry to trouble you." Lin Xian remained vigilant towards the stranger who was so friendly to her for the first time. After thanking him politely, she quickly closed the door. Bang! Seeing this, Qin Shui could only smile helplessly, then turned around and returned to the elevator. While he was waiting for the elevator, 2 men in black suits appeared out of nowhere and followed him into the elevator. "I've checked. This girl is just an ordinary person. You two will transfer a group of people from the branch and divide them into 2 groups to protect her 24/7, understand?" Understood. Although Qian Shi had already killed the old man whom Steward Sun regarded as his heavenly father, he did not have the time to play hide-and-seek with the remnants of the Jinli sect. For the sake of Lin Xian's safety, Qian Shi simply handed this important task to Qin Shui. He hoped that Qin Shui could protect Lin Xian for a period of time until the Jinli sect was completely wiped out by the Wu Lian. Qin Shui did not understand the situation. When he saw that Lin Xian was a young and beautiful girl, he naturally could not help but misunderstand the situation. Therefore, he valued Lin Xian's personal safety so much. Lin Xian did not know what had happened. It was not until she opened the document bag and saw what Qian Shi had left for her that she suddenly realized. Qian Shi and his family had already left. They did not even leave a word of farewell. The only thing in the file was a handwritten draft with a fountain pen. Although it was a draft, it was written in one go without any mistakes. Moreover, the handwriting was very neat. Could be said that the strokes were like dragons and snakes. Lin Xian looked at the contents of the draft and realized that this should be the cultivation method that Shi had mentioned before. There were 2 parts in total. One part was the qi cultivation chapter, and the other part was the qi cultivation chapter. Lin Xian looked at the flowing handwriting and suddenly heard Shi's rhythmic voice. It was as if Shi was by her side at this moment and was guiding her on how to cultivate. She did not know why, but after randomly flipping through the draft in her hand, Lin Xian's mood suddenly became much better. Therefore, she clenched her delicate fists as if to encourage herself. She pouted and said loudly, Xian, do your best, do your best. Even if it was just an impossible dream, she would continue to live in it. It would be best if she would never wake up. Shangjing, Dongming Alley. It was a familiar place with the strong smell of Beijing. The taxi had just stopped at the entrance of the alley when the naughty little guy impatiently pushed open the door and ran out like a wisp of smoke. While running, she shouted at the top of her lungs, "Big cat! Big cat! Big cat!" Her sweet voice echoed in the alley. As if in response to her shout, a sharp cat's cry suddenly sounded from behind the wall. Meow! A black shadow leaped onto the wall and stood on top of it, looking around. That silly look on his face. Wasn't that the big cat that she had not seen for a long time? The big cat stood on the wall and looked for a while. When it saw the little guy's familiar smiling face, it immediately ran along the wall. Its movements were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it was already above the little guy's head. Then, it spread out its limbs and jumped from the wall, directly pouncing on the little guy on the ground. Meow! Perhaps it was because it had not seen its little master for a long time, so this guy was especially enthusiastic. Big cat! Looking at the big cat pouncing on her, the little guy immediately opened her arms happily and made a gesture to catch it. However, just as the big cat was about to pounce on the little guy, a big hand suddenly grabbed it in midair. Meow! The big cat looked at Shi with a dumbfounded expression. But before it could recover, Shi slapped it on the head. Look at you, how fat are you? Can a 5-year-old child like her catch you? While speaking, Shi also weighed the big cat's weight. It must be more than 10 kilograms, right? It had only been a few months, and this guy was about to grow into a Garfield cat. Become smaller. How can she carry you when you're so fat? She pinched the big cat with a look of disgust. But after the big cat heard this, it could only respond with an innocent face. Meow! This guy's cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds, so its body was getting bigger and bigger. Although it could change its size, there was a limit to this transformation. Could not become smaller than a mouse, right? Therefore, its current size was already the smallest it could ever be. She understood what the big cat meant. But when he looked down and saw Nianyan's hopeful little eyes, he immediately said to the big cat in an unquestionable tone, "You can't become smaller, right? I'll help you." Chapter 317. After Shi's gentle massage, the big cat's originally plump body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. As a cat, of course, it's better to be more agile. Perhaps it was because she hadn't seen the big cat for a long time, so the little thing was particularly clingy today. When she tiptoed and raised her small hands, happily taking the big cat from Shi's hands, she immediately put her rosy little face on the big cat and kept rubbing it. After rubbing it for a while, the little thing used both hands to hold the big cat and raised it in front of her. Then she looked into its eyes and asked seriously, Big cat, did you miss me?" Meow, 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 meow. This little thing was quite sensible. It knew that its only mission was to make Nianyan happy. So after a few calls, it stuck out its tongue and licked Nianyan's little face. The slippery feeling immediately made the little thing giggle. The little thing stood there with the big cat in her arms. She waited for a while, then carried her and the cat, and went straight to the courtyard. "Nianyan, let's go home. What should we do when we see Grandpa later?" "I know. We have to take the initiative to say hello to Grandpa. Smart. The family of 3 walked into the courtyard. Just as they turned the screen wall and came to the door of the drooping flower, a figure slowly walked out from the main hall. Wasn't that Qin Yongyan, who had been away for a long time? Just by standing there casually, he naturally exuded a scholarly temperament, which gave people a feeling of transcendence, as if he was as deep as an abyss and as high as a mountain. Seeing this, she bent down and put the little thing on the ground, and the little thing bent down and put the big cat on the ground. Then, she opened her arms and ran all the way to the main hall. Grandpa! Grandpa! We're back! The little thing ran very fast with her short legs. Qin Yongyan seemed to be afraid that she would accidentally fall, so he quickly walked down the stairs. Oh, Nian is back. Did you miss Grandpa? Yes. I missed Grandpa so much. Oh, Nian is so good. Qin Yongyan gently picked up the little thing from the ground. Soon after, the little thing happily tossed and turned in his arms. That mischievous look immediately made Qin Yongyan laugh. As people get older, most people would like children more and more. And this should be the so-called generation gap affection. When Qin Yongyan saw Qin Yongyan and the couple called out, "Dad!" The smile on his face, Qin Yongyan's face became even brighter. The whole family stood in the courtyard and chatted for a while. Then, Qin Yongyan seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly reached out and pinched the little thing's little face. Then, he smiled and asked, "Ying, this child's birthday is coming soon, right?" "Yes, it will be in half a month." Just as Qin Ruoying finished speaking, before Qin Yongyan could say anything, the little thing in his arms suddenly turned her head. The little thing didn't say anything. She just stared at Qin Ruoying with her big, watery eyes. At that moment, there was a timid and expectant expression on her rosy little face. Birthday, for this little thing who didn't have parents since she was young. It was a feeling that she had never experienced before. Although Nian was still young, she already knew a lot of things. A child's memory was fragmented, so she only vaguely remembered that Aunt Zhang would cook her a sumptuous dinner and buy her 1 or 2 little toys that she liked on her birthday. Because her parents had never celebrated her birthday with her, she never felt that there was anything wrong with Aunt Zhang's arrangement. But every time she played with other children in the neighborhood, she would always hear the other children bragging about how they celebrated their birthdays. "Where did Daddy take me to play today? What did Mommy buy me? How big was the cake? How fun was the birthday present?" Comparing was a very common behavior among children. Whenever the little thing was not convinced, she would pout her little mouth and shout, "When it's my birthday, Grandma will also cook delicious food for me. She will also buy me toys." As she spoke, she waved the rainbow ring in her hand, trying to prove that her birthday was also very good. Nian was very satisfied with her birthday present, but the other children didn't think so. Children nowadays were very smart. Of course, they knew what toys were expensive and what toys were rare. The rainbow ring in Nian's hand was only sold for 3 yuan at the small store at the entrance. Of course, they didn't care about it. It was also because of this that Nian didn't like to play with them later on, because she would always be ostracized, ridiculed, and mocked by others. Ba, wild child. She's a wild child without parents. Don't play with her. Wild child. Perhaps it was because she thought of these unhappy past events. The smile on the little thing's face suddenly faded a lot. Fortunately, Chun-Shi's eyes were sharp and almost instantly noticed the change in her expression. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Chun-Shi roughly understood her state of mind. Thus, he hurried to Qin Yongyan's side and took the little thing into his arms. Then, he asked with a gentle face, "Nian, it's your birthday next month. What birthday present do you want?" Hearing this, the little thing pursed her little mouth and shook her head. She didn't say anything, but the little hand that grabbed Chun-Shi's clothes tightened. "Nian, good girl. What birthday present do you want?" Chun-Shi caressed her little face, encouraging her to tell her what she wanted for her birthday. However, the little thing didn't know why. After pursing her little mouth for a while, she actually burst into tears. The sudden turn of events stunned everyone. She hurriedly hugged her and comforted her patiently. However, the little thing was crying while reaching out her hands to Ruoying. Mama, Mama. No matter how naughty and mischievous a child was, she was still just a child. When her peers were ostracizing her and mocking her, how strong did this child have to be to silently bear all this? Mama, Mama. The little thing lay on Ruoying's shoulder and cried heartbreakingly. Mother and daughter were connected by heart. When Ruoying saw her sad look, she suddenly felt touched and couldn't help but cry. She quickly hugged the little thing even tighter. Nian, don't cry, don't cry. Mother is here, don't cry, don't cry. A child's mood was like the weather in June, it could change at any time. Qin Yongyan never thought that his casual question would touch on this little thing's sad matter. However, these sad things had happened a long time ago, so after Ruoying gently comforted her for a while, the little thing slowly stopped crying. She stood by the side and didn't say anything. Seeing that the little fellow's emotions were gradually calming down, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. His daughter was already 5 years old, and as a father, it was his first time preparing a birthday present for his daughter. It had been 5 years. When he thought of this, there was only one thought left in Shi's mind. I love you, so I want to give the whole world to you. And this was the deepest and most profound feeling he had for Nian. People called it. Chapter 318. It was easy for children to forget some unhappy things, but this didn't mean that they wouldn't think about it again in the future. If one day they suddenly associated these unhappy things, they might be inexplicably unhappy, or even sad. These behaviors may be somewhat incomprehensible in the eyes of adults, so there were often situations where the children were crying while the parents were confused. What's wrong with the baby? You were playing just now. Why are you suddenly crying? Did someone bully you? Do you want to buy something? In fact, the child was just reminded of the past. After all, they were still young and hadn't learned how to control their emotions. Even adults would become very sad when thinking about sad things, let alone children. Only when they grew up would they truly learn to be strong. Under the comfort of Ruoying, the little girl quickly stopped crying. However, this also reminded Shi that he must prepare a birthday gift in half a month. After forgetting those troubles, the little girl's face was full of smiles again. Shi used WeChat to video call Gu Lao. After a few simple polite words, the two sides of the call became the three little guys. Nian was waving her small hands vigorously on this side, while the twins were pushing and squeezing on the other side, all scrambling to talk to her. When Shi saw this situation, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but reveal a smile. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, but the friendship between these three little things hadn't faded in the slightest. After they each told their own happy experiences during this period of time, the brothers made an appointment with Nian to meet at the tea house tomorrow, saying that they had a gift for her. Hearing that the brothers had a gift for her, the little girl's mood was obviously much better. Therefore, after hanging up the phone, she happily rode the big cat in the courtyard. The big cat was wearing a saddle, like a black horse galloping back and forth in the courtyard. Nian turned into an excellent rider, holding the reins in one hand and patting the big cat's butt with the other, constantly shouting, "Giddy up! Giddy up! Giddy up!" accompanied by her bell-like laughter. This courtyard that had been silent for a period of time seemed to have regained its vigor and vitality. Night fell. Above the vast Pacific Ocean, a figure slowly flew over. Then the figure plunged into the sea like a falling meteorite. This was a deep-sea area with a depth of more than 3,000 meters. She plunged straight into the seabed like a sharp sword. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of a cave at the bottom of the sea. Because of the turbulent current entering and exiting the cave, every time the tide rose, a whirlpool would appear at the cave entrance, sucking in everything around it. When the tide receded, the hole would spew out the things that were previously swallowed, so no creature was willing to settle down here. Such a natural deep-sea cave was definitely a place that explorers would dream of. But it was a pity. The hole was very small, almost the size of an elevator door. It was impossible for a large deep-sea submarine to enter. Shi used his chi to protect his body and quickly swam through the depths of the cave like a sailfish. The cave was very deep and complicated. There were many passages connected. Each passage went left and right, and connected to small caves one after another. It was like a spider web maze, and there was no telling where the end was. There was no light in the cave, so she lit up a light ball. Where the light reached, all kinds of underwater plants immediately reflected colorful light. Like a flexible fish swimming through the cave, after about 2 or 3 minutes, she came to the end of the cave. Then, he directly floated to the surface of the water. This place, it turned out to be a waterless cave. It was like an inverted cup in a basin. Because there was air in the cave, the seawater could not rush in. This was common knowledge in physics that even elementary school students knew, but it was impossible to find such a place in reality. Unless the walls of the cave were specially processed to withstand the pressure and erosion of the seawater, to ensure that the air in the cave would not leak, and to maintain a stable air pressure, thus resisting the pressure of the seawater. Obviously, this cave had been modified by Shi, otherwise it was impossible for the seawater not to rush in. The cave was about 40 to 50 meters deep, 10 meters wide, and 7 to 8 meters high. The end of the pool was slightly narrower, looking like an egg. She pushed the light ball in his hand into the air, and the strong light suddenly illuminated the entire cave. In the cave, there were people. She looked up and saw 2 people floating in the air with their arms and legs spread out. They looked like Jesus on the cross. So, have you thought about it? She slowly walked into the depths of the cave. As he walked, he said this to the 2 of them. Shi's voice was not loud, but after his voice fell, the cave kept echoing for a long time. Cough? After hearing Shi's words, one of them immediately twitched a few times. However, he was firmly bound in the air by an invisible force, so he could only barely shake his head. Cough, cough. This person coughed heavily a few times, then slowly raised his head. His hair was messy, and his long hair covered half of his face, but it still did not cover his eyes that were filled with hatred. This person, it was actually Bai Hong. Bai Hong raised his head with great difficulty, and after looking deeply at Shi, he said with a hoarse voice, "A soldier can be killed, but not humiliated. If you have the ability, just kill me." At this moment, Bai Hong looked very weak, like a prisoner who had not eaten for many days. If one looked closely, one could see that his body was full of thin golden needles, and he looked like a hedgehog. And this was obviously Shi's masterpiece. After Shi defeated the 3 people, he did not directly kill them, but used a secret technique to imprison them here. The densely packed golden needles on Bai Hong's body were the legendary spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles. As long as one was hit by these needles, the immortal cultivator would not be able to make the Yuanying come out of the body, and the soul would be completely imprisoned in the body. I don't have the ability? After hearing Bai Hong's words, Shi smiled and waved at him, then went to the ice block that Shui Xiong had turned into and looked carefully. After confirming that Shui Xiong would not wake up in a short time, Shi turned to Bai Hong and continued, "Do you know why I didn't kill you?" Bai Hong did not reply. Seeing this, Shi smiled lightly and continued, "The reason why I didn't kill you is because I don't want to kill indiscriminately. I just wanted to ask you a few simple questions, but you didn't cooperate at all. Could it be?" Chapter 319. Bai Hong lowered his head and didn't speak, but the anger in his eyes never extinguished. With his current appearance, he looked a bit like a loyal minister who was wrongly imprisoned in ancient times. At this moment, he was being hung on the city wall by the traitor Shi as a warning to others. Shi stood on the ground and looked at Bai Hong silently. After waiting for a long time and not waiting for Bai Hong's reply, Shi couldn't help but sneer and said again, "I don't know if you have a secret method called soul snatching?" Speaking of this, Shi deliberately paused. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he chuckled and said, "This secret method has the miraculous effect of exploring other people's memories. The conditions for using it are very simple, as long as the other party loses the ability to resist. However, although this secret method is good, it has a great flaw, that is, it will bring some sequelae to the person who is to be used. Well, a light case of Qigong deviation, a heavy case of the soul dispersing. There are 3 people here, so who do you think is more suitable to use this secret method on? Chen Shi's voice sounded like it came from the 9 serenities, giving people a gloomy feeling. And the moment Bai Hong heard the words soul-snatching, his body couldn't help but tremble violently, not because of fear, but because of anger. Despicable! After squeezing out such a word from the gap of his teeth, Bai Hong raised his head and growled word by word. Let me tell you, if I ever get away, I will definitely cut you into pieces. Very good, very good. Chen Shi chuckled a few times, and after pretending to clap twice, he didn't talk nonsense, but directly took out the soul crystal from his arms. His divine soul injury had not healed yet. Bai Hong and the others were in a high realm, so for safety reasons, Chen Shi naturally needed the help of the soul crystal when using this secret method of soul searching. However, the moment Chen Shi took out the soul crystal, Bai Hong's face suddenly changed, and he asked anxiously, "Why do you have Gui Yao's mysterious crystal?" Gui Yao? Black crystal? After glancing at the soul crystal in his hand in puzzlement, Chen Shi asked thoughtfully, "Since you recognize this thing, why don't we have a good chat?" Bai Hong seemed to want to know where Chen Shi got the soul crystal from. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "This mysterious crystal, where did you get it?" The Siachen Glacier, yes, a place 5,000 meters above sea level. Where? Bai Hong didn't know where the Siachen Glacier was, nor did she understand what Chen Shi meant by the altitude. Left with no choice, Chen Shi could only ponder for a while before asking, "Karakoram, do you know this place?" Kunlun. The moment she heard this term, Bai Hong's eyes couldn't help but widen. It was obvious that he knew about Kunlun. Chen Shi noticed this detail, so he wisely shut his mouth and kept looking at Bai Hong. The expression on Bai Hong's face was a little uncertain. He knew what Chen Shi meant, so after hesitating for a while, he let out a deep breath and said hatefully, "Fine. What you want to know isn't some secret that can't be told. It's not a big deal to tell you." Later, in Bai Hong's slow narration, Chen Shi finally learned some secrets about the ancient times. A long, long time ago, the earth was indeed a cultivation holy land similar to the Tianxian domain, so many cultivation inheritances were born. But one day, the spirit of heaven and earth on the earth began to weaken and dry up for no reason. If the spirit of heaven and earth was compared to a water source, then the cultivators were the fish in the water. Once the water source was lost, the fish would naturally go extinct. The cultivators on the earth obviously couldn't sit still and wait for death. Therefore, leaving the earth to find a place to cultivate became the common goal of everyone. The universe was vast and boundless. It was full of opportunities and hidden dangers. There was definitely more than one cultivation holy land. If one wanted to go from one cultivation holy land to another, not to mention whether there was a map navigation, even if there was a map navigation, could one really get there smoothly? Chen Shi was able to smoothly return to the earth from the Tianxian domain. The hardships he had to go through were not something ordinary people could bear. Moreover, to fly across galaxies, one would need to be at least at the soul formation stage. How many soul formation stage cultivators could there be on Earth? This was related to the problem of whether the cultivation inheritances on Earth could continue to be passed down. Therefore, the cultivators of the ancient times put aside their prejudices and united to find a way to pass down their inheritances. Heaven would not let down those who worked hard. Under the leadership of the most powerful cultivator of the ancient times, the Tai Ching sacred master, the ancient cultivators finally found a way to survive, and that was a great world that existed in the void. A great world was similar to a small grotto heaven. If explained from a modern scientific point of view, it was somewhat similar to the concept of a dimensional space. If the universe Chen Shi was in was compared to a bedroom, then the great world was the closet in the bedroom. It was closely connected to the universe, but it was a closed space of its own. And this was the so-called great world. The only difference between a great world and a small grotto heaven was that the former was naturally formed and existed in the space cracks of the vast universe, while the latter could be opened manually. Of course, the scale, size, and stability of the two could not be compared. The Great World was discovered by the Tai Ching sacred master when he was looking for a cultivation holy land in the universe. After he brought the news back to Earth, he united all the cultivators on Earth and gathered everyone's strength to open a passage directly from Earth to the Great World in the void. And this passage was also called by the later generations the Gate of Heaven. This information seemed very important to Chen Shi, but it was a historical event that everyone in the Great World knew. Therefore, Bai Hong had no intention of hiding it at all. Soon, she told Chen Shi about the origin of the Gate of Heaven. This was also the information that Chen Shi wanted to know the most. Therefore, after Bai Hong finished speaking, she looked at Chen Shi, ready to listen to him talk about the origin of the soul crystal. Without any discussion, the two of them reached a tacit agreement. This was a very good start. Therefore, Chen Shi told Bai Hong about the origin of the soul crystal and the Temple of Time in detail. He deliberately spoke in detail, paying attention to the changes in Bai Hong's expression during the process. When Chen Shi said that he had destroyed the soul of the Azure Dragon in the Great Hall, he keenly noticed that Bai Hong's pupils suddenly contracted. There was something fishy. Chen Shi looked deeply at Bai Hong. After telling the story about the soul crystal, it was his turn to ask again. Chapter 320. What was the sundial? Chen Shi raised his question, but Bai Hong did not answer immediately. He looked at the soul crystal in Chen Shi's hand and was silent for a long time before he answered slowly. Back then, after the Tai Ching sacred master led everyone to the Great World, he left 5 sacred temples in the lower realm. One of them was the sundial. Although the Great World was self-contained, it was still a spatial crack in the depths of the void. It was just that this crack was larger and more stable than an ordinary small grotto heaven. But it was a pity. Although the Great World was good, it was far from being as stable as the main world. It might suddenly close one day and imprison the ancient cultivators in the void forever. Therefore, the Tai Ching sacred master left 5 sacred temples on Earth. These 5 sacred temples used the soul crystal as the core to suppress 5 ancient ferocious beasts and used their powerful souls as the coordinates to communicate between the 2 realms. As long as the souls of the ferocious beasts in the 5 sacred temples were not destroyed, even if the spatial crack suddenly closed and trapped the ancient cultivators in the void, they could still find the main world through the souls of these 5 ferocious beasts and forcefully open a passage back to the main world. The remnant soul of the Azure Dragon that Chen Shi had encountered before was an ancient ferocious beast suppressed by the Sundial Temple. Because of the nourishment of the soul crystal, the Azure Dragon's soul had not dissipated after so many years. The Azure Dragon was an ancient ferocious beast. In terms of intelligence, it was not inferior to the ancient cultivators. But it was also because it was an intelligent creature that the moment Chen Shi opened the seal, the Azure Dragon attacked Chen Shi crazily and tried to occupy his body. After all, it had been imprisoned for a very long time and its desire for freedom had long been ingrained in its bones. Now that it finally saw the hope of escape, it naturally would not let it go. But the Azure Dragon never expected that what it had waited for with great difficulty was not freedom, but the tragic fate of having its soul destroyed. The Sundial Temple was like a signal tower connecting the 2 realms. Once the Azure Dragon's remnant soul was destroyed, the ancient cultivators in the Great World naturally could no longer sense the existence of the Sundial Temple. Therefore, they sent Bai Hong and the others to investigate the situation and also to see where Chongli had gone and why he had not returned. At the mention of Chongli, Bai Hong immediately frowned deeply. Guiyao was destroyed. Chongli's fate was unknown. And now even the 3 of them had fallen into the hands of this person, completely reduced to prisoners. Everything was the work of this mysterious man in front of him. When did such an expert appear in the lower realm? Thinking of this, Bai Hong couldn't help but take a deep look at Chen Shi before asking her second question. Who are you? His question was very general, so Chen Shi immediately replied with a smile. Me? My name is Chen Shi. I'm from Zhonghai and I'm currently living in Shangjing. I'm unemployed and I own a tea house. I spend most of my time at home with my wife and kids. Bai Hong wasn't a fool. This perfunctory answer naturally wouldn't satisfy him. Therefore, he immediately interrupted Chen Shi and said angrily, Don't try to trick me. With the cultivation conditions of the lower realms, it's impossible for an existence of your level to appear. Who are you? Why do you want to be our enemy? Bai Hong seemed to be very concerned about this question. Seeing this, she spread out his hands innocently and replied seriously, "Why would I lie to you? I'm really a native of Earth. Yes, Earth is the lower realm you mentioned. I've always been in the lower realm, so I don't know anything about your world. Otherwise, why would I waste my time asking you these simple questions?" These words were reasonable, and for a moment, Bai Hong didn't know how to continue asking. Yes, if Shi also came from the lower realm, then why didn't he know the history that everyone knew? Bai Hong secretly tried to figure out Shi's background. Shi waited for a while. Seeing that Bai Hong didn't speak, he asked with a smile, "Okay, now it's my turn to ask questions?" Bai Hong didn't answer. Seeing this, she continued asking, "Let's talk about the lower realm. I'm very curious about the situation inside." As he spoke, he gently rubbed the soul crystal in his hand with his finger. This action seemed to be a silent warning to Bai Hong that if he still didn't speak, he would use force. In fact, the reason why she took the trouble to ask and didn't directly use the secret technique to search his soul was mainly because his soul injury had not healed. After all, Bai Hong and the others were not weak and their souls were intact. If they also happened to practice some kind of secret technique that strengthened their souls, then she would very likely suffer a backlash in the process of casting the technique and go crazy. She now had the upper hand and had plenty of ways to make Bai Hong talk. Naturally, he wouldn't take the risk so easily. It was better to be safe than sorry. She had a deep understanding of this. Looking at the glimmering light on the soul crystal, an indescribable feeling suddenly appeared in Bai Hong's eyes. After exhaling deeply, he looked at Shi and slowly said, "The lower realm? That's a place that's close to paradise." The lower realm was located in a void crack in the depths of the universe and was connected to Earth through the gate of heaven. Therefore, even if Earth's spirit chi was exhausted, the lower realm still had rich spirit chi of heaven and earth. As the ancient cultivators came to the lower realm one after another, the grand pure divine ancestors' fame and prestige reached its peak. If one wanted to make an enemy of the grand pure divine ancestor, they had to be mentally prepared to make an enemy of the entire lower realm. Therefore, the Grand Pure One relied on his supreme power to turn the tide and support the building that was about to collapse to successfully do something that no one before him had ever done before, and that was, he combined the originally scattered and independent cultivator legacies and successfully created an organization called Celestial Capital in the lower realm. The appearance of Celestial Capital was like Qin Shi Huang sweeping through the 6 nations and unifying the world. Under the intentional push of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, the various sects and clans put down their prejudices and learned from each other. They learned from each other and learned from each other. Everyone obtained the benefits they wanted, and Tiandu ushered in its most glorious moment. But it was a pity that this glory didn't last forever. The path to immortality was difficult as ascending to the blue sky. Even a stunning and unparalleled existence like the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor was unable to break free from the shackles of the heavenly Tao in the end. As a result, his lifespan ran out and he passed away with regret. With the passing of the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital's strength also weakened rapidly and was no longer as glorious as before. However, as the saying goes, a dead camel is bigger than a horse, and a rotten ship still has 3 caddies of iron. Although Celestial Capital was no longer as glorious as before, with the assets left behind by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, Celestial Capital was still the strongest force in the lower realm. As the Divine General of Celestial Capital, Bai Hong naturally could not tell Shi all the details of Celestial Capital, so after a brief introduction of the origin of Celestial Capital, he closed his mouth again. In this regard, Shi had no intention of continuing to ask, because he had roughly guessed the current situation of Celestial Capital. The reason was very simple. The world was as black as the crows. In order to survive, cultivators had to strengthen themselves through plundering. If the immortal cultivators were regarded as animals, then from the perspective of such a selfish ethnic style, to create a country or organization with a centralized system similar to that of heavenly capital, that was simply an impossible thing. After all, as consumers at the top of the food chain, cultivators could strengthen the overall strength of the clan after forming an organization, but they did not have enough resources to maintain the operation of the organization. It was precisely because of this that cultivators had always established relationships with each other in the form of clans and sects, and could only huddle together in a small area for warmth. In the end, it was all because of those simple 8 words: natural selection, survival of the fittest. Chapter 321. The Great World. Tiandu, the Tai Ching sacred leader. Although Bai Hong deliberately concealed a lot of important information, it didn't stop Chun Shi from making a reasonable analysis. Thus, when he connected all the information he already knew together, a clear picture suddenly appeared in his mind. First of all, he could confirm that Earth was originally a cultivation holy land similar to Tianxian. However, on a certain day a long time ago, Earth's spirit qi suddenly declined. In order to survive, the ancient cultivators entered the great world under the lead of the Tai Ching sacred leader. The so-called Heavenly Gate was actually a passage connecting the 2 realms. The Tai Ching sacred leader gathered everyone's strength to open the Heavenly Gate to the great world. Then, he left 5 sacred temples on Earth to maintain the connection between the 2 realms. Although the ancient cultivators had left, they had left behind some incomplete inheritances on Earth. Thus, the ordinary people left on Earth evolved all kinds of cultivation methods based on these legacies, such as necromancers, martial artists, yin-yang masters, and so on. However, it was a pity that the cultivation environment on Earth was so bad, and because the legacies were incomplete, the celestial realm became the limit that the cultivators on Earth could reach. At this time, the group of celestials trapped on Earth naturally began to think of ways to continue to break through, just like their ancestors had done. Later on, they should have found a way to communicate with the great world, so there were many legends about the Heavenly Gate in this world. Once the Heavenly Gate was opened, one could ascend. However, they didn't know that the opening of the Heavenly Gate was not controlled by the ancient cultivators. The Tai Ching sacred leader gathered everyone's strength to forcibly open a passage to the great world. Why would he open it again for 1 or 2 celestial realm juniors? The reason why the Heavenly Gate was so difficult to open was mainly because the spirit qi of the 2 realms was too different. Here was an example. If the great world was a sealed pressure cooker, then the Heavenly Gate was the lid. Because the spirit qi in the great world was much denser than on Earth, there was a strong pressure difference between the 2 sides of the Heavenly Gate. In the face of such a strong pressure, if one wanted to open the lid with violence, it would be equivalent to bearing the impact of the entire great world's spirit qi alone. In this situation, not to mention insightful emptiness, even an immortal emperor would find it difficult. Since it was impossible to open it by force, some ingenious methods were needed. A portion of the gas was discharged through the vent to reduce the pressure in the pressure cooker. When the pressure inside the cooker was about the same as the pressure outside, the lid could be opened easily. However, the great world was not a pressure cooker, and there was no vent on the divine gate, so they could only use the second method. That was, by increasing the air pressure in the outside world, the air pressure between the 2 worlds would be the same. Then it would be easy to open the lid. It sounded simple, but in practice it was exceptionally difficult. After all, if the spiritual qi on Earth could reach the level of the great world, why would the ancient cultivators leave their homes and hide in the great world? Therefore, every time the divine gate opened, it was actually the time when the spirit qi on Earth began to recover. Thinking of this, Chun Shi finally understood the role of Shen Nu. The great world used the spiritual souls of the ancient ferocious beasts to locate Earth. Similarly, the cultivators on Earth had to use the same method to locate the great world. With the depletion of spiritual qi, there were no more ancient ferocious beasts on Earth. Therefore, they could only settle for the next best thing, which was to use Shen Nu's Yin soul to maintain the connection between the 2 worlds. No one knew when the divine gate would open, so generations of Shen Nus had been replaced, until the generation of Qin Ruoying and Qin Xueqing Shen Nu. At the thought of this, Chun Shi's eyes instantly became much sharper. After all, this was an important issue related to Yingying's spiritual soul. He had already found Yingying's Yin soul and taken care of those old bastards in the village. There shouldn't be any more problems, right? Chen Shi thought seriously for a long time. In the end, he still felt a little uneasy, so he asked again, "By the way, do you know what Xian Nu does?" Xian Nu? Xian Nu was not a product of the great world. Bai Hong had nothing to hide about this, so she asked straightforwardly, "You mean Siming Xian Nu?" Siming Xian Nu? After Chen Shi repeated this name, he replied hesitantly, I think so. Other than Siming Xian Nu, I haven't heard of a similar name. If you want to ask about Siming Xian Nu, then I'm sorry, I don't know much about it." This answer obviously did not satisfy Chen Shi, so he immediately frowned and asked, "Why? You came from the great world. Don't you need Xian Nu to sense the location of Earth?" We have the Sun Glory Temple. Why do we need Siming Xian Nu?" After hearing Bai Hong's matter-of-fact answer, Chen Shi was stunned. That's right, since the ancient immortal cultivators in the great world used the souls of ancient fierce beasts to maintain the coordinates of the two worlds. Why did they need Xian Nu's soul to guide them? Chen Shi stared at Bai Hong for a long time. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. His figure flashed, and he appeared in front of Bai Hong out of thin air. Since Siming Xian Nu and the Sun Glory Temple have the same function, that means the former is just a substitute for the latter. You just said that the Sun Glory Temple has been controlled by Tiandu since ancient times? Even if I accidentally destroyed the Sun Glory Temple, there should be 4 temples left that have the same function. So, I want to ask you to tell me, Siming Xian Nu, and who is in control of it? Chen Shi floated in the air, at most 2 meters away from Bai Hong. He just looked at Bai Hong quietly, and Bai Hong also saw a dignified feeling in his eyes. Chen Shi was not stupid. The reason why this seemingly contradictory question appeared now was obviously because Bai Hong concealed some information that might involve Siming Xian Nu towards Tiandu, and even the entire great world. Chen Shi had a curious attitude, so she did not delve into how much truth or falsehood Bai Hong's words had. However, when these questions began to involve Qin Ruoying, Chen Shi naturally had to change his way of communicating with Bai Hong. Although Bai Hong and Chen Shi had not met many times, it was the first time he saw Chen Shi so dignified. So he very wisely shut his mouth and was ready to answer after thinking about it, because he also knew that if he continued to be perfunctory, the two of them might not be able to chat so happily anymore. Think carefully before answering. Chen Shi gave Bai Hong enough time to think. So, after a moment of silence, Bai Hong slowly said 2 words. Chapter 322. Attention to all bosses. A bug has appeared. The previous chapter has been modified. Chapter 321. The correct way to open the divine gate. Please review it. Please forgive us if we have caused you any inconvenience. Sorry. Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu. The truth was just as Chen Shi thought. Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu was indeed the guide for cultivators to ascend to the great world. Through a secret technique, the elders placed Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu's earthly soul into the soul mirror, thereby establishing a connection with the great world. There were 2 sides to the soul mirror. One was in celestial capital and the other was on earth. Just like a wired telephone, Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu's earthly soul was the most important telephone line. However, Xian Nu herself was only a mortal. Therefore, when they became Xian Nu, their earthly souls had to be at their most stable and strong. That is, between 10 and 30 years old. Just like an old saying, a person will pass noon after 30 days. Once a person's age exceeded 30, their body's various functions would gradually decline, and they would go downhill. The so-called Arbiter of Fate was the mandate of the heavens. According to the village's tradition, becoming Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu was a very glorious and fortunate thing. However, only the elders knew, even after Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu left office, the earthly soul would not be returned to them. The moment they became Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, they were destined to have 1 less soul than ordinary people. If one of the 3 souls was missing, they could not be considered a complete person. Therefore, every time Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu left office, their bodies would suddenly become very weak, as if they had leukemia. They would be weak all over and fall sick easily. In addition, the effects of the soul recovery soup would gradually weaken, and the consequences of losing one of the three souls would gradually become apparent. Arbiter of Fate Xiannu usually did not live past 35 years old. It was also because of this that Qin Ruoying's mother died young. Of course, Arbiter of Fate Xiannu's function was obviously not limited to this. Through Bai Hong's explanation, She was surprised to learn that the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu had another use, and that was, cultivators in the Great World could use the Arbiter of Fate Xiannu to check the condition of Earth's spiritual energy and selectively open the heavenly gates. Other than that, even Bai Hong wasn't sure if Siming Xiannu had any other secrets. As a result, after telling Shi everything he knew, he said calmly, "That's all I know. If you still don't believe me, you can search my soul." Bai Hong's temperament was originally cold and arrogant. Now that she had become Shi's prisoner and had unwillingly confessed some things under his interrogation, she naturally felt very uncomfortable in her heart. What's more, even if he told the truth, she still had a suspicious look on his face. Bai Hong was naturally unwilling to say anything more. It was merely a soul-searching. What did he have to fear? Seeing this, she didn't force her anymore. After seriously considering the truth of Bai Hong's words, she turned and flew back to the ground. "It's getting late. Let's call it a day." After landing, she waved at Bai Hong without looking back, then walked straight out of the cave. Anyway, there were still many days ahead. He had plenty of time to slowly chat with Bai Hong. However, just as she was about to step into the pool, Bai Hong suddenly called out to him, "Wait!" Her voice was very weak. However, Shi's ears were very sharp. He immediately stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at her. Is there anything else?" Shi waited for a while, but Bai Hong didn't say anything. For a moment, the deep cave was so quiet that not even the sound of breathing could be heard. After an unknown amount of time, Bai Hong's voice slowly rang out from the darkness. "If we calculate according to the time in the lower realm, the divine gate will open again in a month at most, including Chongli, for divine generals of Tiandu have already fallen in your hands, so it's impossible to ignore it like before. If you let us go now, I can promise to let bygones be bygones and pretend that these things never happened. Otherwise, what you will face might be even more terrifying than you think." Hearing this, Shi's lips suddenly curved into a slight smile. However, he didn't say anything harsh. As if he was saying goodbye to an old friend of many years, he waved casually at Bai Hong and jumped directly into the pool. They were all adults. Didn't they know what was right and what was wrong? If they didn't have some skills, would Shi deal with them like this? Naive. It was getting late, so after Shi left the cave, he prepared to go to the Siachen Glacier to pick up Yingying from the Sundial Brilliance Temple. But when he traveled on the seabed for a while and was about to fly to the shallow sea area, he suddenly sensed a faint fluctuation of spiritual energy around him. Out of caution, Shi followed this fluctuation of spiritual energy and carefully searched the seabed. This was the deep sea where even the sun couldn't shine. Being in it gave people a feeling of being in the universe. Shi lit up a light ball. Suddenly, a colorful fantasy world appeared in front of him. Fish of all shapes and colors moved freely on the seabed. In addition to fish, there were all kinds of shellfish, starfish, corals, and seaweed dancing in the waves. Faced with this dreamlike underwater world, the first reaction in Shi's mind was, Nian should also like this place, right? Why not take advantage of her birthday and take her on a day trip under the sea? She seriously considered the feasibility of this idea. At the same time, he quickly came to the place where there was a fluctuation of spiritual energy. This was a seabed gully about 100 meters wide, like a natural moat in front of him. Seeing this, she didn't hesitate and went straight into the trench. The two sides of the trench were as steep as cliffs, so as soon as he entered the trench, it was as if he fell off a cliff. The trench was not deep, about 20 to 30 meters. The bottom of the trench was full of colorful coral reefs, and schools of fish were swimming back and forth around the coral. In addition, there were all kinds of strange crustaceans, such as shrimps and crabs. She didn't even know which species they belonged to. She simply patrolled around and didn't find anything strange. but that trace of spiritual energy didn't disappear from the beginning to the end. The reason why Chun-Shi was so interested in this spiritual energy was that this spiritual energy was not the original spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Instead, it seemed to have been roughly processed, somewhat similar to the existence of true essence. Of course, this spiritual energy was far from being as pure as true essence. The spiritual energy was too scattered, and he couldn't find the specific location. So after Chun-Shi patrolled again, he was ready to leave. But just as he was about to leave, he inadvertently saw a fish hiding in the coral reefs. Separated by dozens of meters, Chun-Shi and the fish looked at each other from a distance. At that moment, Chun-Shi saw a trace of fear in its eyes. This fish was actually like a human, and it could actually use its eyes to express its emotions. Chun-Shi raised his eyebrows and almost instantly understood why. This guy, surprisingly, it was also a monster that had gained intelligence. Thinking of this, Chun-Shi was ready to catch this fish and study it. But before he could do anything, the fish seemed to have realized something. Like a cat whose tail was stepped on, it immediately drilled into the nearby coral reefs. The speed was very fast. If it wasn't for Chun-Shi's eyesight that was far better than ordinary people, he would have thought that he was seeing things interesting. Chapter 323. A fish that had awakened its intelligence. Obviously, this fish was like the big cat. Because it encountered some kind of opportunity, it opened its own path of cultivation. However, the big cat's original form was a leopard. Leopards were at the top of the food chain. Therefore, before they gained intelligence, the big cat's chances of survival were naturally much higher than the fish in front of him. It was just a small fish, not a shark or a whale. Could it overturn rivers and seas? Fish were like rabbits, weak and timid. Even the slightest movement could frighten them, not to mention that this was a fish with intelligence comparable to that of a human. Therefore, when the fish realized that Chun-Shi had found it, it quickly drilled into the coral reef, wanting to hide as far away from this human as possible. But regrettably, the person it encountered today was not those diving enthusiasts who wore swimsuits and carried oxygen tanks, but immortal cultivators who protected their bodies with vital energy. Even if they were in the water, they were like birds soaring in the sky. The coral reef in front of him was very lush. It was as difficult as looking for a needle in a haystack to find this living fish. But fortunately, Chun-Shi was no longer the same as before. After this period of recovery, his soul injury had recovered a little, and the range of his divine sense had naturally increased a lot. Therefore, Chun-Shi, with the help of the soul crystal, allowed his divine sense to cover more than half of the trench in an instant. Wherever his divine sense went, even if it was a drop in the ocean, Chun-Shi could see it all. Then, Chun-Shi found the fish in the deepest part of the coral reef. At this time, he finally saw the fish's appearance. This was a typical deep-sea fish, so its appearance was very different from river fish and shallow sea fish. Because it lived in the dark seabed all year round, the characteristics of deep-sea fish were usually a big mouth, big eyes, and a certain part of its body had a light-emitting device. Through the light-emitting device, they could emit light to lure prey, and at the same time attract mates and reproduce. Most of the deep-sea fish had strange shapes, and Chun-Shi had not deliberately studied the species of deep-sea fish. But when he saw the fish's appearance clearly, the name of this fish appeared in his mind in an instant, and that was anglerfish. The name sounded complicated, but in fact it referred to the kind of fish with a lantern on its head. It was also because of the lantern on its head that this fish was often called the anglerfish. There were many species of anglerfish, most of which were very ugly and even a little scary. But the one in front of Chun-Shi was different. Perhaps it was because it was an immortal, so this anglerfish did not look ugly. Instead, it gave people a feeling of stupidity and cute. Looking at it carefully, it was a fish of the Asian anglerfish. Unlike an anglerfish's body it had a layer of golden scales on its body. Looked like the protagonist of the clownfish in Finding Nemo. Its body was as fat as a basketball, and it had a lantern on its head. Looking at its silly appearance and its timid little eyes. So, Chun-Shi made a decision in an instant, and that was to catch it and bring it back to Nian Nian as a pet. As for fish, although it could not be held in the hand to play with at all times, it could be placed in the fish tank for viewing. Thinking of this, She smiled and flew over the coral reef where the fish was. This unlucky anglerfish hid timidly in the coral reef, and probably would never understand. Why was he so unlucky? In the courtyard, when the little girl was awakened by a burst of clatter-clatter noise, she lay by the window with a dull look in her eyes. In the courtyard, several workers were moving a huge fish tank to the steps of the west wing under Shi's command. "Mama, what are they doing?" After looking for a while, the little girl rubbed her eyes, and then obediently went to the bathroom under Qin Ruoying's lead. "Daddy bought you a fish, so we have to put a fish tank at home to raise fish," Qin Ruoying explained with a smile. But this little thing seemed to have misunderstood, so she pouted and muttered softly, "I don't like to eat fish of bones." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying was a little dumbfounded. She pinched her little face and explained, "This fish is not for eating." "Not for eating? Then what is it for?" "For you to see." "I don't want to see. I don't like fish." Because fish had bones, she didn't like to eat fish, and then she didn't like this kind of animal. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying didn't say anything more to her. Anyway, she would be able to see the fish in a while. After the little girl finished her breakfast under Qin Ruoying's care, she carried the big cat and stepped out of the west wing door. When She saw her coming out, he shouted for her to come to his side. "Nian, come. Daddy bought you a new pet. Do you like it?" As he said that, She carried her to the fish tank. This fish tank was 3 to 4 meters long, and placed on the steps of the west wing, it almost blocked the wall. However, when the little fellow saw the dull gray stones and the strangely shaped corals, it shook its head with a stupefied expression. It was obvious that her heart didn't waver. Seeing this, She immediately put his right hand on the panel on the side of the fish tank, and then said to her mysteriously, "Dang, dang, dang, it's time to witness a miracle." After saying that, She pressed the light switch of the fish tank. Because of the refraction of light, a fish tank without lights and a fish tank with lights on were simply two different things. Therefore, the moment the light was turned on, the little thing's eyes suddenly lit up. Corals, shells, and seaweed. These things that came from the sea, under the illumination of the lights, suddenly presented a dreamy beauty. "Oh, it's so beautiful!" Seeing that the fish tank was so beautiful, the little girl suddenly cried out happily. The guests entered, but the protagonist didn't appear for a long time. Therefore, She patted the fish tank and quietly released a stream of vital essence. At this time, the silly anteater was like a cat whose tail was stepped on, and suddenly came out of the coral cave. "Papa! Fish! Look, it has a lantern on its head." After seeing the silly anteater, the little girl was immediately attracted by the lantern on its head. She was already very excited, but the big cat in her arms was even more excited. The moment the anteater appeared, the big cat jumped out of the little girl's arms directly to the top of the fish tank, and then stretched out its claws to catch the fish. What was happiness? Happiness was when cats ate fish, dogs ate meat, and Ultraman beat up small monsters. The big cat also noticed that the fish was not simple, so it wanted to weigh how much it weighed. However, at the moment it stretched out its claws, She grabbed its neck, and then brought it in front of him, and said to it word by word, "I'm warning you, don't touch it. If I find out that you ate it, tell me, do you like steamed or braised?" Hearing this, the big cat suddenly shook its head excitedly. Perhaps it was because it was too excited, its body was trembling slightly. Chapter 324. With the appearance of the fish tank, the huge courtyard finally had one more permanent resident. This anglerfish's head was very big, so when the little guy asked what it should be called, She decisively gave it a name, Big Head. It was especially vivid and vivid. At the same time, it sounded like it complemented the two words big cat. Big head? Because her vocabulary was too small, after the little one whispered the name in her mouth, she said with a happy face, "Big head sounds good. This is big cat, this is big head. Fish, you'll be called Big Head from now on." Okay. Big Head was a deep-sea fish and had never been in contact with humans, so it naturally didn't understand what the little one was saying. However, although it didn't understand what the little one was saying, the big cat next to it understood. So, it immediately rolled its eyes in a very human-like way. It was obviously a cat, but its eyes revealed a very disdainful feeling. Such a proud performance in the eyes of Chun, she naturally couldn't avoid giving it a slap. After settling Big Head, the family of 3 faced the late spring sun and leisurely walked out of the tea house. After not coming back for 2 months, a light layer of dust had already accumulated in the tea house. The couple rolled up their sleeves and began to clean. As for the little girl, she slipped into her own children's playground and happily played with building blocks by herself. However, she didn't play for long before there was a sudden burst of shouting outside the tea house. Nyen Nyen, we're here. After not seeing each other for a long time, the 2 brothers were not polite at all. After each of them pushed open a glass door, the 2 brothers jumped into the tea house side by side. Gu Lao thought that the 2 brothers would wait for the old man to enter before letting go. He didn't expect that just as he walked to the door, the glass door had already bounced back and almost hit him in the face. This troublesome child. Seeing this, Gu Lao helplessly shook his head, then opened the door and greeted Chun Shi and his wife. As usual, after making a pot of tea, Chun Shi played Go with the old man. The 3 little things were making a ruckus in the children's playground. Qin Ruoying turned on the stereo and played some soothing light music. Then, she picked up a book called Collection of Flowers and sat in the booth next to the children's playground. In this warm spring season, this small tea house hidden in the corner of Hohai had a kind of leisurely and carefree atmosphere. At the same time, it was relaxed and lively. Unfortunately, although the tea house was good, it rarely had customers. Today was not the weekend, so it was not until Gu Lao brought the 2 brothers home for lunch that the door of the tea house was finally pushed open. He was still not a guest. The little fellow looked up. Wasn't this person Xiao Yuan, whom he hadn't seen for a long time? She didn't contact Chun Shi in advance, but she didn't expect that she would coincidentally rush over on the first day of the tea house's opening. If I remember correctly, Beijing Normal University is not that close to Hohai, right? Why did she just happen to wander over? Boss, Xiao Yuan had just walked into the tea house when she looked up and saw Chun Shi and his family sitting around a tea table preparing to eat. Therefore, she immediately lowered her head in embarrassment. She felt like she was here to freeload. Sister, you're here. Let's eat. Come. The little fellow waved the chopsticks in his hand and shouted excitedly. In fact, since the end of the winter vacation, Xiao Yuan would visit Hohai every day. She wanted to come over and help when the tea house opened. She didn't know why she liked to come here. Repaying kindness was only one reason. On the other hand, it was probably because of the boss family of 3. Although the boss didn't look much older than her, he always gave people the feeling that he had seen the world. Coupled with the knowledgeable and virtuous lady boss, as well as the lively and cute little guy, Xiao Yuan always wanted to follow them around and learn from them in detail. This was not homework, nor was it work. It was an attitude towards life. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. Birds of a feather flock together. Xiao Yuan felt that she might have met the light in her life. Unknowingly, she was influenced by the husband and wife, which caused her to have a change from the inside out. This change wasn't obvious, but hidden. Perhaps it would be many years later that she would truly realize what she had learned as a waitress here. Although the tea house didn't need to hire waiters, Chun Shi obviously couldn't just chase them away. Therefore, after Xiao Yuan repeatedly promised that she wouldn't fall behind in her homework, Chun Shi finally gave her the keys to the tea house. From now on, she would be the shopkeeper here. An ordinary and leisurely day passed just like that. Xiao Yuan took some time to go to school to get her suitcase. Then, she once again moved into the courtyard. As soon as she stepped through the drooping flower gate, she saw the huge fish tank and the big cat that was lying on top of the fish tank and kept meowing into the tank. Every time the big cat meowed, Big Head would immediately spit out a series of bubbles as if it was responding to it. The fish and the cat were communicating in a way that was completely incomprehensible to humans. Is this a anglerfish? The moment she saw the fish, such a question appeared in Xiao Yuan's mind. If she remembered correctly, the anglerfish should not have scales, right? This fish, what kind of fish was it? Why did it feel a little strange? Although Xiao Yuan felt that it was a little strange, she didn't ask much. She had already made up her mind to follow the boss in the future. She would see more, learn more, and do more. Although she was only a waitress in the tea house, when she held the keys to the tea house, a fighting spirit ignited in her heart for no reason. The peaceful and indifferent life kept repeating itself. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye it was summer. This morning, while the little girl was feeding the fish, she quietly came to her side, and then asked mysteriously, "Nian, come. Daddy wants to ask you a question. Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and thought for a while. But after thinking for a long time, she still couldn't think of a reason, so she shook her head blankly. "Think again." She asked again. But the little girl shook her head again. She had no choice but to cough lightly and remind her. "Today is May 5th. Hearing this, the little girl still didn't seem to react, and the expression on her face looked very cute. She was silent. Then, he suddenly raised both hands, like a child, and shouted very exaggeratedly, "Today is your birthday. Are you happy?" Birthday? The little girl was obviously stunned. But then, as if nothing had happened, she turned around and continued to throw minced meat into the fish tank. Big Head opened its bloody mouth. Every time it swallowed a piece of minced meat, it happily turned around in the water. And the big cat was lying on the side, and from time to time, it would poke its head out to snatch a piece of meat to eat. This behavior made Big Head so angry that it kept bubbling in its mouth. This scene made She stunned. Strange. Nian's reaction was not right, but after thinking about it, she understood what was going on with the little girl. Chapter 325. She had discussed with Qin Ruoying for a long time about how to arrange Nian's birthday. On her birthday, he would take her to fly in the sky, travel the 4 seas, look at the land of the divine land, and see all the beautiful scenery. Although the idea was quite tempting, after some consideration, she finally decided to let Nian live a normal childhood. After all, this was not the Tianyuan world, and Nian would have to go to school in the future. If he really let her come into contact with the world of immortal cultivators in advance, then when other children were talking about toys and cartoons, wouldn't Nian be talking about how high and how deep the sea was? Let me tell you a secret. Actually, my papa is Superman. He is invulnerable and can fly. When he thought that Nian might use such a proud tone to show off to her classmates in the future, she couldn't help but imagine their reactions. Ridicule was inevitable. Children nowadays were very precocious, and they already knew a lot of things when they were just a few years old. Many children thought that their father was Superman, but reality would always teach them a lesson. How could there be Superman in this world? So they would turn to ridicule those children who always thought that their father was Superman. If your father is so powerful, why don't you save the world? But the more they ridiculed her, the angrier Nian would be, and then she would want to prove that she wasn't lying. After all, she knew that her father could really fly. Nian wasn't lying, but who would believe such a thing that sounded like a fantasy story? Other people's fathers couldn't fly, why could your father fly? From the moment she said that her father was Superman, Nian was no longer sociable, so everyone only ridiculed her even more. She said that her father is Superman, do you believe it? I don't believe it. She must be bragging. Mom said not to play with bragging children. We have to stay away from her. Bragging King Ba. Of course. She didn't want to see such a thing happen. So after much consideration, he decided to arrange an ordinary and happy birthday for Nian. Even if he didn't take her to fly, she believed this day would be the best memory of Nian's life. Therefore, after she comforted Nian's inexplicable emotions, the family of 3 set off directly. They didn't bring the big cat, nor did they call the twins. because all the activities today only him and Ying were needed. After She got into the taxi with Nian in her arms, the little guy's mood was obviously relieved. So she nestled in his arms and asked softly, "Papa, where are we going?" As she spoke, she looked at Shi with her big, cute eyes. Needless to say, her small eyes were naturally filled with anticipation and desire. Papa and Mama were going to celebrate her birthday with her today. Since she wanted to give Nian a birthday that a normal child should have, naturally he had to plan carefully. After all, he wasn't the kind of parent who worked overtime all day and couldn't even spare time to celebrate a child's birthday. "I'll take you to a fun place. Papa promises that you'll have a good time today." "Really? Where is it?" Hearing this, she immediately smiled, and then said mysteriously, "It's a secret for now." He wanted to keep it a secret, but this little girl was impatient, so she kept shaking his arm and said coquettishly, "Papa, tell me, tell me." Okay, I'll tell you." She couldn't persuade this little girl, so after gently pinching her little face, he explained with a smile, "Today, I'll take you to the big world to play." The big world. The little guy pouted his little mouth and muttered this noun, but a blank expression appeared on his face, because in her little brain, there was no place called the big world. Of course, the big world that she was talking about was not the big world hidden behind the divine gate, but the children's paradise world. This was a large outdoor expansion park that covered an area of 150 acres in the western suburbs of Shangjing. Although it was not as big as Disneyland in Zhonghai, it had its own characteristics and could be regarded as a holy place in the minds of children. The theme of the park was forest. So as soon as the little girl came to the gate of the park, she cried out, "Papa, there are so many trees here." It was the end of spring and the summer solstice. The park was full of towering trees with luxuriant foliage, and the lush leaves were natural umbrellas. Walking on the stone path under the shade of the trees and looking at the green grass under the feet would inadvertently give people a very comfortable feeling. The slogan of the park was, "Let children return to the forest and experience the best natural scenery." Since it was a children's paradise, naturally, a series of outdoor entertainment facilities were the most popular among children. But unlike other children's paradises, most of the children's facilities here were closely integrated with the forest. For example, the climbing net that was commonly seen in children's paradises was attached to several towering trees. From time to time, the children would climb from one tree to another, looking like lively and cute little monkeys. There was no ceiling or classroom here, and the whole forest was a children's activity area. Running freely in the open-air forest, listening to the sweet sounds of birds and insects. Although it was not as exquisite and beautiful as an indoor amusement park, it had a unique natural charm. The park was very large, and the activity area was naturally large. So after the little girl climbed in the jungle expansion area for a while, she was tired and out of breath. Thus, she was like a spider demon that had just eaten her fill. She sprawled out on the climbing net like that. Seeing this, the couple sat on the grass under the shade of the trees and kept cheering for her. The little fellow rested for a while, and then crawled up, huffing and puffing. When she finally climbed to another big tree and slid down the tree's slide, she waved her small hands and threw herself into Qin Ruoying's arms. "Mama, good, fun, I want to play." Qin Ruoying saw her panting and was ready to pull her to sit next to her. But she didn't expect. After the little guy finished drinking the water, he suddenly broke free from her arms and ran back to the starting point, ready to play again. This child. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying could only shake her head slightly. Since it was a children's paradise, the child's safety was obviously fully guaranteed. So the couple sat aside and cheered the little girl up from time to time, so that she could play more happily. It wasn't that Nian hadn't used these facilities before, but she still had a lot of fun today. Therefore, when she asked her if she had a good time today, the little girl suddenly nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice. It was good that she was happy. Only when she was happy, it was considered a birthday. Since it was a birthday, naturally, there was a birthday cake. So, After the little girl had played to her heart's content, she took her to the park's self-service barbecue area. After making a sumptuous barbecue meal for her, she clapped his hands and signaled the staff next to him to push the cake up. As the cake entered, the band that she had arranged in advance immediately came to the little girl's side and played a birthday song for her. It wasn't that the park had never held a birthday party before, but it was really the first time that a birthday party was more grand than a marriage proposal for a child's birthday. Therefore, the area where Shi's family was immediately surrounded by tourists who were watching the fun. Accompanied by the band's performance, the onlookers, led by Shi and Qin Ruoying, sang the birthday song together loudly. Happy birthday to you, 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 healthy birthday to you, have a warm family, Nian happy birthday. When had the little girl ever seen such a scene? So, she was stunned on the spot. Until she pushed the cake in front of her, the little girl didn't seem to come back to her senses. Seeing this, she squatted beside her and said softly, Nian, happy birthday? Come, blow out the candles, and you can make a wish. Any wish is fine. Chapter 326. Birthday Wish. Looking at the crowd of onlookers, the little girl couldn't help but feel a little dazed. So she timidly grabbed Shi's arm. She looked like she had stage fright. In fact, Aunt Zhang had celebrated her birthday before, but she had never mentioned anything about birthday wishes. After all, she was old and naturally did not know much about foreign culture. In the past, her family was poor. A red egg and a bowl of longevity noodles were the best birthday gifts for children. As for birthday cakes, in Aunt Zhang's eyes, those were just snacks that children liked to eat. Since Nian liked them, she would buy them for her. Therefore, Aunt Zhang did not have any concept of making a birthday wish on her birthday, so she had never arranged for it for her. Nian, what birthday wish do you have? Today is your birthday, so you just have to make a wish now. After you blow out the candles, your wish will come true. She hugged the little girl and explained patiently in her ear. The little girl curled up in Shi's arms. After looking up at Shi, she pouted and shook her head, as if she could not think of anything she wanted. Seeing this, Shi tried to guide her. Nian, you can only make a birthday wish once a year. Don't you have anything in particular that you want? For example, if you want to eat something, play something, or go somewhere, you can tell me now. Daddy promises to satisfy you. Hearing this, the little girl seemed to finally understand the concept of birthday wish. Therefore, she pouted and asked hesitantly, Can I really make anything come true? Ahem. This question made Shi pause for a moment. At this point, if the little girl made a wish but could not make it come true, wouldn't she be very disappointed? After all, this was the first time she made a birthday wish. She was a little hesitant about whether to make a promise. However, on second thought, she was just a 5-year-old child. Could she make a wish that was so difficult to make? Therefore, he answered with certainty, Yes, Father can promise you that no matter what you wish for, it will come true. When he said this, Shi's tone was particularly solemn, which made Qin Ruoying, who was beside him, couldn't help but glance at him. This sentence was, What about the father's promise to his daughter? The little fellow didn't feel anything special, so when she heard Shi's reply, she smiled happily and said, Okay, then I have a wish. With that said, under the guidance of Shi, she stood on the bench facing the cake. Then, she put her hands together, closed her eyes, and prepared to make a wish. Looking at her serious face, the crowd immediately quieted down, afraid to disturb this cute little girl. She didn't think for long before she suddenly opened her eyes and said excitedly, My wish is, Papa and Mama have to stay by my side forever. The family of 3 lay in the tent, quietly looking up at the sunset. The green grass, the clear lake, the towering trees, and the sound of insects and birds from time to time at this moment. The family of 3 was particularly peaceful. The little fellow put her head on Shi's chest, quietly watching the sunset dye the sky and the water red. Perhaps she also realized that the wish she had just made was not reliable, so she could not help muttering, "Papa, Mama? What's wrong? Don't leave me again, okay? I don't want to be a wild child." Hearing this, she suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Even with his age and experience, he could not control the sudden burst of emotion for a while. Therefore, she immediately hugged the little fellow with one hand and Ruoying with the other, and replied very solemnly, "Okay." This warm atmosphere seemed to have infected Ruoying, so she followed the little fellow and leaned her head on Shi's chest. Then, the mother and daughter leaned on Shi's chest like this, blinking their eyes and looking at each other. "Nian, come on. Dad will teach you a song? Is it Little Star?" No. I'll teach you a new song today." "Okay. Then listen carefully. I'll sing it once first." After that, she began to hum softly. This song was very simple and the melody was not very complicated, so after listening to it twice, the little fellow could hum along with Shi. Shi's low voice, coupled with Ruoying's quiet and gentle voice, plus the little fellow's clear and melodious childish voice. This song, "Insects Fly," which always gave people a feeling of sadness, was unexpectedly sung by this family of three with a happy and cheerful taste. The dark sky hung low, followed by the bright stars. Insects fly, who are you thinking of? The stars in the sky shed tears, the roses on the ground withered. The cold wind blows, as long as you're with me. Insects fly, flowers sleep, pairs after pairs are beautiful. I'm not afraid of darkness, I'm only afraid of heartbreak. Chapter 327. It was a very ordinary birthday, but it was destined to be the most precious memory in the little girl's life. There was a gentle breeze by the lakeside, a lush green meadow, and a lush forest. The family of three lay lazily in the tent and fell asleep under the accompaniment of the starlight. It wasn't until the sun rose again that the little girl opened her eyes in a daze under the sunlight. The important birthday passed just like that, but her interest didn't seem to have waned at all. So, as soon as she got up, the little girl squatted by the lake and happily played with the lake water. Seeing this, she took her to breathe the first breath of fresh morning air while doing exercises by the lake. "Nian, Daddy will teach you how to do morning exercises, right? Okay, good girl. Then come over and stand behind me. I'll do one, you do another. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. Very good. Next is body rotation exercise, walk." She acted as a physical education teacher, standing by the lake and shouting slogans while doing standard movements. The little girl followed behind Shi's butt, doing her best to twist her butt and shake her hands. That silly look looked very cute. As Shi's magical slogan continued to ring out, many parents seemed to be infected by him. So, they brought their children behind them and started to do the radio calisthenics with the father and daughter pair. After finishing their morning exercises and eating breakfast, the family of three finally got on the car to return home. On the way back, she played the role of a language teacher and gave the little girl an essay question. The question was, "The most unforgettable day." The little girl was very interested in this question that was obviously out of the syllabus. So, she told the little guy about the 6 essentials of writing, and under his patient guidance, the little guy was able to draw inferences about other things from one example, and successfully wrote the first essay of his life. The only regret was, Nian still didn't know how to write, so there was no way to write this essay on paper. However, she believed that when Nian attended language classes in the future, this piece of the most unforgettable day would definitely become a model for her teacher's lectures. Under their tutelage, Nian would definitely become an excellent Chinese class representative in the future. In this regard, she was full of confidence. It was a sunny afternoon in Hohai, a quiet and cozy little tea house. The leisurely days passed by slowly, until this day, May 20th. Only half a month had passed since Nian's birthday. Logically speaking, with the dry summer weather, there should be very little fog in the morning. But today he didn't know why. In the morning, as soon as the little girl opened the door, she saw a foggy scene, as if winter was coming. The thick fog obscured their vision. The little fellow stood outside the door of the west wing. When she raised her head, she couldn't even see the door of the east wing clearly. The visibility was at most 5 meters. Standing in the courtyard and looking at the sky, the thick fog even covered the brilliant morning sun. The fog cast a mysterious veil over the familiar things around him. Standing in the courtyard and looking at the sky, the thick fog even covered the brilliant morning sun. The whole sky was gloomy. In this regard, the little fellow was particularly excited. She actually played hide and seek with the big cat in the fog. The big cat circled around the courtyard, and the little fellow chased after it. Because she ran too fast. When she realized that there was someone in front of her, it was too late to stop. Thus, the little fellow fell into the arms of that person. Nian, run slower. Be careful not to fall. The little fellow looked up and found that she had fallen into Qin Yongyan's arms. She immediately opened her mouth and sweetly called, "Gramp, good girl, go play." Qin Yongyan touched the little fellow's head, and then gently let go of her. After this period of cultivation, Qin Yongyan's cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. He was originally a master of gang strength, so when he refined all the genuine qi in his body into genuine essence, his cultivation smoothly reached the late stage of foundation establishment. He was only one step away from becoming a legendary celestial being. Qin Yongyan stood on the stairs outside the main hall and looked at the sky thoughtfully. Only then did he turn his head to look at the west wing. Then he suddenly nodded in that direction, as if he was greeting someone. The little fellow continued to chase the big cat in the courtyard. Suddenly, a pair of big hands stretched out from the fog and directly picked up the naughty little fellow from the ground. "Nian, stop playing. It's time for breakfast." Chun-Shi's gentle voice rang in the little fellow's ears. So, the little fellow immediately put her arms around Chun-Shi's neck and said coquettishly, "Papa, I want to eat crystal shrimp dumplings." Didn't you say you wanted to eat soup dumplings today?" "No soup dumplings. I want crystal shrimp dumplings." Chun-Shi was obviously prepared for this little fellow who often changed her mind, so he pinched her nose and said with a smile, "I knew you would do this. Let's go. We have both. You can eat whichever you like. Papa is so nice." It was obvious that this sudden fog was a sign of the arrival of the heavenly anomaly. Just as Bai Hong had said, the gate of heaven would open again very soon. Chun-Shi didn't think too much about this. The gate of heaven opened for a limited time each time. Even if the people of Heaven Capital were determined to investigate, what could they find in such a short time? The village had been destroyed, and Bai Hong and her people were either dead or injured. They were still locked in the cave at the bottom of the sea. Everything that needed to be dealt with had already been arranged properly. Who would know that he was the one who did all this? What's more, even if they knew, what could they do? If a cultivator at the soul formation stage was determined to hide, it was definitely not so easy to find. Right now, Chun-Shi only wanted to live a low-key life, so when this fog appeared, he acted like he did a few days ago. He ate, slept, and acted as if everything had nothing to do with him. Therefore, after the family of 3 had breakfast, they prepared to open the tea house as usual. But just as they were about to walk out of the courtyard, Qin Ruoying suddenly stopped. She frowned and looked a little uncomfortable. "Ying, what's wrong?" Chun-Shi immediately noticed Qin Ruoying's strangeness, so he hurried to her side and held her hand very nervously. "Nothing, I just felt a little dizzy just now. I'm fine now." Hearing this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying with slight surprise. Dizzy? What a joke. What's Ying's cultivation level? How could she feel dizzy? At the thought of this, Chun-Shi immediately released a trace of true essence, and then carefully sorted out Qin Ruoying's physical condition. He didn't find any problems. But the more it was like this, the more worried Chun-Shi was. Ying could get sick? Chun-Shi's expression was a little uncertain. In order not to worry him, Qin Ruoying seriously felt her own situation, and then said with a smile, "It's really nothing. Maybe it's because I was a little absent-minded just now, so I felt like this." Now I'm fine. Qin Ruoying signaled Chun Shi not to worry. At this time, the little fellow, who had already run out of the door with Xiao Yuan, turned her head and found that her parents didn't follow, so she quickly ran back. Papa? What's wrong? The little fellow looked at Chun Shi in confusion. Seeing his dignified look, she carefully stretched out her small hand and pulled the corner of Chun Shi's clothes. Chun Shi was silent for a while, and then suddenly said to Xiao Yuan, Xiao Xiao, you go and open the door first. Ying is a little uncomfortable today. I'll take her to the hospital. Okay, boss, I'll go and open the door first. After Xiao Yuan left, Chun Shi ignored Qin Ruoying's objection and took her directly back to the room. Nian, Papa is going to check Mama's body. You watch cartoons by yourself first. When Papa is sure that Mama is fine, I'll take you to the tea house. Okay? Okay. The little fellow nodded very sensibly, and then sat on the bed obediently. Seeing Chun Shi's dignified look, Qin Ruoying gently squeezed his hand and said with a smile, Shi, I'm really fine. Hearing this, Chun Shi directly interrupted her, and then said with a serious face, Good girl, I'll check whether you're fine or not. Chapter 328. Some people could become a world-class superstar by playing football, while others could become an Olympic champion by diving. But if one wanted to reach the top of the world in something, it was definitely not something that could be achieved by hard work alone. Everything had to be about talent. Even when playing games, some people could reach the diamond rank after playing for 3 months, while others were still struggling in the silver rank after playing for 3 years. There were geniuses in all walks of life, but in this world, most of them were ordinary people who could not even compare to others in playing games. Qin Ruoying was such an ordinary person. At least, in terms of cultivation, she really did not have any outstanding points. So even with Chun Shi, a soul formation expert, training with her all day long, Qin Ruoying's improvement was still so slow. With this kind of cultivation talent, if placed in the Sky Yen God sect, she might not even be as good as the most ordinary outer disciple. But there was no other way. Who asked her to have a strong background? Of course, poor aptitude was one thing, but no matter how bad Qin Ruoying was, she was still a cultivator who had stepped into the foundation establishment stage. Even martial artists could be immune to all kinds of diseases, let alone cultivators. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying said that she was a little dizzy, Chun Shi's reaction was obviously a little overboard. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. Perhaps it was because Qin Ruoying had lost her in spirit previously. Chun Shi now paid extra attention to any abnormal situation. For the sake of caution, Chun Shi even used the amplification effect of the soul crystal and carefully checked the situation of Qin Ruoying's soul. Qin Ruoying's spirit had already returned, so no matter how Chun Shi looked, he did not find any problems. Could it be? Was it really like what Ying said, because she was a little absent-minded just now, so she suddenly felt a little dizzy? Psychological effect? While Chun Shi was depressed, the little fellow was secretly paying attention to his expression. As soon as she saw the expression on Chun Shi's face slightly relax, this clever little thing eagerly came to his side, then hugged his arm and acted like a spoiled child. Papa? What's wrong with Mama? This silly child has learned how to read people's expressions. Seeing this, Chun Shi pinched her little face and said with a smile, Mommy is fine. Let's go. I'll take you to the tea house to play with your brothers. All right. Since Qin Ruoying was indeed fine, Chun Shi could naturally put down the big stone in his heart. When the family of 3 walked out of the west wing again, the thick fog in front of them still hadn't disappeared. The heavenly anomaly this time. Could it have happened in Shangjing? Chun Shi looked up at the sky and observed for a while. In the end, he did not want to go and investigate. Instead, he carried the little fellow and walked straight into the tea house. Whether it was the recovery of spirit energy or the opening of the heavenly gates, none of this had anything to do with Chun Shi. Whether it was in the past or in the present, his ambition had never changed, and that was 30 mu of land, a cow, and a warm bed for his wife and children. Just a few simple sayings, but they were enough to describe the ideal life in his heart. While Chun Shi was busy accompanying his wife and children Siachen Glacier, Beiyao Temple, She had long guessed that someone might come to the Beiyao temple to check the situation. So he removed the restrictions outside the temple long ago. At the top of the snowy mountain, the wind and snow seemed to never calm down for a moment. The mountain wind whistled past, mixed with bursts of snowflakes fluttering in the air. It was obviously a beautiful dynamic picture, but it gave people a sense of peace and tranquility. At this moment, it seemed that even time had stopped. In the wind and snow, two figures were particularly conspicuous, like two drops of ink on a piece of rice paper. One of them was relatively young, about 30 years old. The other person's hair and beard were all white, and he wore a green robe. He seemed to have a kind of sage-like charm. The young man was holding a bronze mirror in his hand, but the surface of this bronze mirror was dark. But there was something strange about it. There was a metallic luster flowing on the surface of the black mirror. From afar, this bronze mirror looked like a black hole, with a mysterious and wonderful beauty. Master, if the records of the divination pavilion are not wrong, the Beiyao temple should be here. The young man looked around, but under the wind and snow, what could he see except for the white snow? The snow had already drowned everything. The old man frowned and cast his gaze on a snowy area. Immediately after, he gently waved his sleeve, and an invisible force suddenly burst out. Like a stone smashing into water, the accumulated snow on the snowy ground immediately exploded and scattered in all directions, turning into snowflakes that fluttered in the air. Then, the old man waved his sleeve again, and a gust of wind suddenly blew in the air. In an instant, the snow that covered the sky and the sun was all blown to another mountaintop. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. A black building suddenly appeared in the old man's line of sight. This unopened sacred hall was like a flower bud waiting to bloom, standing alone on the mountain peak. Seeing this, the young man immediately soared into the air and flew above the hall in the blink of an eye. He held the mirror and looked at the hall. Immediately, as if some mechanism had been activated, a series of ka-ka rotating sounds could be heard in the hall. Then, this black hall slowly bloomed under the young man's slightly bewildered eyes. This is the Beiyao temple. The young man landed in the center of the hall and carefully looked at the strange patterns on the floor. But just as he was curious about the things around him, the old man suddenly called out to him, "Wuxia, there's no need to look. Let's go." Hearing this, the young man called Wuxia immediately flew back to the old man's side, and then asked with a puzzled expression, "Master, what happened to this temple? The evil spirit has been destroyed, and the soul crystal has been lost. Without these two cores, the Beiyao temple can be considered to be completely destroyed. Is there no way to repair it?" "There's no way." The old man shook his head, then suddenly asked, "Wuxia, carefully feel the aura here and see if you can sense anything?" "Okay." After hearing the old man's words, the young man sat cross-legged in the air, held his breath, and carefully felt the surrounding spirit of heaven and earth. "Master, this place seems to have the aura of senior brother Baihong. He should have been here before? Is that so?" After the old man glanced at the black lotus below, he waved his sleeve again. The wind and snow all over the sky suddenly surged. The old man did not use true essence to protect his body. Instead, he allowed the goose feather-like snow to continuously fall on his body. Therefore, in a short while, the old man's body was covered with a shallow layer of white snow. They came in a hurry, and they left in a hurry. If I'm not wrong, they're probably dead by now. What? Hearing this, the young man's face couldn't help but change drastically. He looked quite excited and asked, "There is still someone in the lower realm who can hurt senior brother? Why not? Moreover, are you so sure that the person who hurt them must be from the lower realm?" "Master, I don't understand what you mean." "If you don't understand, think more." Seeing the old man's serious expression, the young man wisely shut his mouth. Then, the old man thoughtfully looked at the bronze mirror in the young man's hand. "Let's talk about this later. The most important thing now is how to deal with the prophecy left by the divine ancestor. The Beiyao temple is destroyed and one of the 5 is missing. Perhaps the divine ancestor expected this to happen back then, so he left this soul mirror behind. Let's go." Let's go to the All Saints Valley first. I hope nothing happened to the inheritance of Si Ming Xian Nu. Chapter 329. The heavy fog lasted for about 2 hours. Because such a heavy fog was so rare, CCTV even made a special report to analyze the reasons for the heavy fog in summer from all aspects. Chen Shi and Gu Lao were drinking tea while listening to the experts on TV blabber on and on. Experts analyzed many possibilities, but the final conclusion was still related to global warming, the greenhouse effect, and such terms that people were already familiar with. No matter what the situation was, as long as there was an abnormal climate, it was definitely due to environmental degradation. Therefore, the experts only repeatedly appealed on TV, hoping that people would spontaneously protect the environment and protect the common home of all mankind. Only a very small number of people knew what did the appearance of the heaven and earth phenomenon mean. Although Chen Shi was in the tea house, his mind was always outside the house. When the heavy fog dissipated, the hot summer sun once again shone on Ho Hai Old Street. Chen Shi smiled and retracted his divine sense. The heavy fog dissipated, which meant that the gate of heaven was closed, and those people should naturally go back. This was undoubtedly good news for Chen Shi. He was not afraid of them, he just didn't want to trouble them. After all, Chen Shi had long passed the age of yelling and killing. Being able to quietly drink tea for a while was more appropriate for an old man like him. Chen Shi and Gu Lao chatted about the recent abnormal weather. While they were chatting, Gu Lao seemed to be touched by something. After a moment of silence, he couldn't help but sigh softly. The ancients said that whenever there is a heaven and earth phenomenon, something big must happen. Chen Shi thought he was referring to the recent weather, so he smiled and didn't say anything. Gu Lao's mind drifted further and further. Before Chen Shi could speak, he continued, I didn't see anything big, but recently, strange things have been happening one after another. Oh, hearing this, Chen Shi finally seemed to be interested, so he smiled and asked, what strange things have you encountered recently? Sigh, maybe it's because I'm old, so this old man is becoming more and more superstitious. Gu Lao smiled and shook his head. After looking at Chen Shi thoughtfully, he sighed softly. There are some things that I've been keeping in my heart for a long time. Little Chen, I can see that you're not an ordinary person. If you're willing to listen, I can tell you about it. Just treat it as listening to an old man complain. Chen Shi had known Gu Lao for some time, but he had never seen him show such an expression. So he immediately smiled and said, Interesting, why don't you tell me about it first? Let me make this clear first. You youngsters should just treat this as a joke. Don't take it to heart. It's nothing, we're just chatting. Don't worry, I'm not a blabbermouth. Alright, it's actually like this. Then, Gu Lao spoke of the things that had been buried in his heart all this time. The old man had never mentioned his family matters to Chen Shi before, but he didn't expect to spill it all out this time. Gu Lao had a daughter, the mother of the 2 brothers, named Gu Yao. But what was regrettable was that, just when Chen Shi moved from Zhonghai to Beijing with Nianyan, Gu Yao died in a car accident. Gu Lao used to live in his hometown in Jizhou. Because of Gu Yao's death, he returned to Ho Hai to take care of the 2 children for his daughter. In fact, Chen Shi had already guessed that there might be something going on in Gu Lao's family. After all, if it was a normal family, how could an old man like Gu Lao take care of the children 365 days a year? And there were 2 of them at once. Not to mention whether he had the energy or not, didn't the children miss their parents at all? What about their parents? No matter how busy they were, there had to be a limit, right? The 2 brothers rarely mentioned their father, which meant that they didn't like their father. The children were still young, so Gu Lao could only lie to the 2 children that their mother had something to do abroad and would only come back once in a while. This excuse was just like how Auntie Zhang used to lie to Nianyan. But here was the strange thing. The reason why these 2 silly children didn't clamor for their mother was that Gu Yao often came back to see them. Moreover, the frequency of her coming back was obviously much higher than before. I buried Yao Yao with my own hands, in the back of the mountain in my hometown. One day after dinner, I was watching TV in the room, and the 2 of them suddenly ran to me and told me that their mother was back. You don't know. When I heard this sentence, My first reaction was that all the hair on my body stood up. Yao Yao is my daughter and their mother, so I believe that even if she became a ghost, she would never hurt me and the children. But you also know, there is a difference between humans and ghosts. How can humans stay with ghosts? So, since that happened, I took the children out every day until it was dark, because I was afraid that if they stayed with Yao Yao for too long, they would be infected with yin energy. After hearing Gu Lao's strange words, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, she couldn't help but interrupt him and ask, "Are you so sure that the child's mother has become a ghost? How can there be ghosts in this world? Have you seen one?" "Although I can't see it, the two of them can." Speaking of this, Gu Lao turned to the direction of the children's park and asked loudly, "One, when was the last time your mother came back?" The older brother was busy playing marbles with the little guy, so the one who answered was the younger brother. "Yesterday. Mom just came back yesterday." After that, the younger brother immediately lay back on the cushion, because it was his turn to play. The three children played happily in the children's park, but Gu Lao could only shake his head and sigh. In this regard, she didn't know what to say. Ghosts is just a lingering spirit after death. From the perspective of immortal cultivators, the spirit was just a kind of pure and weak energy body. It couldn't even be called a life. Everything has a spirit. Not only human beings will leave behind a spirit after death. If it's a spirit left behind by a living creature, it will retain some memories of its life, but it won't be more than 7 days. It's also because the spirit is pure enough that it's easier for the spirit to come into contact with the origin of all things, heaven and earth spiritual qi. Take a human as an example. If soon after a person's death, the spirit happens to float to a place with rich heaven and earth spiritual qi, then it's very likely that it will merge with the heaven and earth spiritual qi and exist in the world as a more powerful energy body. The spirit isn't scary because they were just weak mortals, animals, or even plants when they were alive. A little bit of heaven and earth spiritual qi only provided them with a chance to continue to exist in the world. When the heaven and earth spiritual qi is exhausted, it's the time when they really disappear. This is the fundamental reason why there are so many ghost legends. But now the strange thing is, Gu Yao has been dead for more than half a year, but her spirit hasn't disappeared, and this. Chapter 330. Things like ghosts. In fact, they weren't as mysterious as the legends said. They were just a kind of energy body, so ordinary people couldn't see them at all. But if the ghost suddenly condensed too much in energy for some unknown reason, it would cause the ghost's soul body to materialize. It was precisely because of this that ordinary people could see ghosts. Of course, this situation was extremely rare. In addition to this situation, there were a very small number of people who could directly see ghosts with their naked eyes. These kinds of people often appeared in folklore, yin-yang eyes. However, the yin-yang eyes wasn't very accurate. Immortal cultivators knew more than ordinary people, so from the perspective of immortal cultivators, the so-called yin-yang eyes was actually far more sensitive than ordinary people, so they could keenly detect signs of spiritual energy or yin energy fluctuations. These people were obviously good seedlings suitable for cultivation. Although she didn't specifically test the brothers' cultivation aptitude, the fact that they could see Gu Yao's ghost meant that the aptitude of these two brothers wouldn't be too bad. Although the seedlings were good, they weren't enough to arouse Shi's interest. What he was more concerned about was, it had been more than half a year. Why hadn't Gu Yao's ghost dissipated? One had to know that the ghost of an ordinary person could only last for 7 days at most. Without the nourishment of the physical body, the soul was quite fragile. Even if the cultivation reached the golden core stage, as long as the yuanying hadn't been condensed, it was impossible to exist in the form of a soul for a long time. She was thinking about the reason why Gu Yao hadn't dissipated. Seeing that he had been silent, Gu Lao thought that she thought he was crazy, so he immediately shook his head and smiled. "Forget it. Just treat these things as gossip. Children's words carry no harm. Maybe it's because they miss their mother too much that they have such hallucinations." Night talk in the city, ghosts, and monsters. These things had always been circulating in folklore, and Gu Lao didn't want this matter to make she feel uncomfortable. After all, even if Gu Yao became a ghost, She was still Gu Lao's biological daughter, so Gu Lao believed that Gu Yao wouldn't hurt him. Chun, she wasn't related to Gu Yao in any way. What if she was accidentally targeted by her? It was better for ordinary people to stay away from such strange things. What's more, Gu Yao had been appearing more and more frequently recently. Every time she appeared, although Gu Lao couldn't see it, he could clearly feel the change in the surrounding temperature. It was clearly a hot summer day, but the room seemed to be air-conditioned. Gu Lao was also worried about this matter, so he couldn't help but tell Chun Shi about it. But as soon as he finished speaking, Gu Lao regretted it. It was best not to scare others when it came to their own matters. However, after listening to Gu Lao's words, Chun Shi responded with a relaxed smile. Let's not talk about whether these things are superstitious or not, but I see that these two children are usually fine. There are no problems with their physical and mental health. Since it's been more than half a year, there shouldn't be any problems. You can think of it this way. Even if these things are just the children's illusions, at least these illusions can bring a certain degree of comfort to the two of them. Just treat it as a kind of spiritual sustenance. After all, the children are still young. They may not be able to accept the fact that their mother has passed away. When they grow up, you can tell them the truth. Maybe this way it will be easier for them to accept it. Chun Shi's words were very vague, but Gu Lao still understood the meaning of his words. Gu Yao had passed away for more than half a year. If she really wanted to hurt her children, something would have happened to these two children long ago. Now these two brothers were alive and kicking all day. It was probably because she loved her children that Gu Yao often returned to visit them. If he thought about it this way, it seemed to be acceptable. Thinking of this, Gu Lao couldn't help but look at Chun Shi with a little surprise and asked doubtfully, "Aren't you afraid?" "And afraid of what?" "This kind of bad luck. If I go back to my hometown and tell them, the people in the village will probably drive us out on the spot. The three of us won't be allowed to go back in this life. If you believe it, then it's true. If you don't believe it, then it's not true. I'm a good person, but I don't believe in evil, so this kind of thing will absolutely not scare me." Hearing this, Gu Lao's mood suddenly became much better. After taking a sip of the teacup, a smile finally appeared on his face and he said, "That's good. I was worried that I would scare you. I won't have such good tea to drink in the future. You can rest assured. I'm one of the 5 good young men of the new era. I have Mao Gai, Maja, and Deng Luan to protect me. I have a 5-star red flag floating above my head and a party emblem hanging on my chest. I guarantee that all evil will be repelled and nothing will be able to invade me." Okay. Let's see what you can do." After hearing Chun Shi's words, Gu Lao couldn't help but laugh out loud, so he immediately changed the topic and asked with a smile, "Since you are so good, why don't you come to my place for a meal later?" In fact, Gu Lao didn't really want to invite Chun Shi home for a meal. He just wanted to use this opportunity to take down his prestige. After all, the two were considered friends despite the difference in age, so they often made some harmless jokes. But what Gu Lao didn't expect was, Chun Shi didn't seem to have used his brain to think. Chapter 331. Heartless Man. After hearing this sentence, Chun Shi's curiosity was suddenly aroused. Could it be those vulgar scenes of abandoning one's wife and children? However, this was someone else's family affair after all, and it was a scandal, so Chun Shi couldn't ask further, so he wisely shut his mouth. This question obviously touched the old man's mind, so after Gu Lao was silent for a while, he sighed deeply and said, "At that time, not only was Yao Yao blind, but I was also blind." Then, Gu Lao frowned and talked about the past of Gu Yao and her husband. Gu Yao's husband was called Xia Kaiji, and the two were college classmates. Xia Kaiji's family condition wasn't very good, but he was ambitious. When others were playing basketball and playing games, he was immersed in studying all day. This kind of man was a typical phoenix man, commonly known as a golden phoenix that flew out of a chicken coop. Phoenix man was not a derogatory term, but because their shortcomings and strengths were equally conspicuous, they slowly left a bad impression in people's hearts. Hard work, diligence, self-discipline, these were all advantages. Because they suffered too much when they were young, most of them were far more mature than their peers, and they hoped to change everything through their own efforts. Just like what a female star said, "I'm from a rich family myself." The worse the family situation, the more eager they were to change through their own efforts. This also led to a very complicated mentality, inferiority, and conceit at the same time. Back then, Gu Yao had been captivated by Xia Kaiji's maturity, which far surpassed that of his peers. But this kind of confidence and maturity often turned into shrewdness. Gu Lao wasn't the kind of person who had secular prejudice. So naturally, he didn't mind Xia Kaiji's poor birth. So after seeing Xia Kaiji a few times, the old man agreed to the relationship between the two. Xia Kaiji was indeed very hard-working. A few years after the two graduated, he became a senior executive in a large company. But with the gradual success of his career, some long-hidden problems gradually exposed. For Xia Kaiji, his career was always above everything. But for Gu Yao, family was the center of life. For this reason, the husband and wife, who were originally intimate, also had a gap. And with the birth of the twins, this gap was gradually widened. Gu Yao quit her job and stayed at home to take care of the child. But Xia Kaiji was nowhere to be seen all day. Finally, one day, Gu Yao had enough of living like a widow. So, after a big fight with Xia Kaiji, Gu Yao took the child and moved back to the old residence in Hohai. Perhaps it was because Xia Kaiji's career had indeed reached a critical juncture during that time. So he hadn't come to find Gu Yao. It was precisely because of this that the two of them had completely lost the chance to reconcile. By the time Xia Kaiji saw Gu Yao again, she was already lying quietly in the hospital morgue. He didn't even have time to look at Gu Yao before he was chased out by the furious Gu Lao. At this point, this unfortunate marriage had completely come to an end. The reason why Gu Lao scolded Xia Kaiji was because Xia Kaiji didn't take good care of Gu Yao, and because of the two children. After Gu Yao's death, Gu Lao felt that the responsibility was all on Xia Kaiji. So he firmly refused to let him raise the two children and refused to let Xia Kaiji see the children. After Xia Kaiji communicated with Gu Lao a few times, he had to let the old man do what he wanted because he didn't want to go to court with his father-in-law because of this matter. So, except for the living expenses that were sent to Gu Lao's account every month, Xia Kaiji completely disappeared from Gu Lao's sight. But the more it was like this, the angrier Gu Lao was. The reason why he didn't let Xia Kaiji see the children was that he wanted to embarrass Xia Kaiji a little as a punishment. But Xia Kaiji didn't even have the least sincerity. After being scolded by him a few times, he actually didn't come anymore. Little son of a bitch, Gu Lao cursed for the first time, and then he continued to hatefully, "The two children are so cute. He doesn't want them as a father, but I, as a grandfather, want them. And he even wants to send living expenses every month. Bah! Does he think I care about his stinky money?" A few days ago, the agent called me and asked if I was selling this old house in Hohai. He said this old house is worth a lot of money now. Tomorrow, I'll go to the police station and change the surname of the two children. In the future, they will follow my surname, Gu. The more Gu Lao spoke, the angrier he became. It made Chun Shi, who started this topic, a little embarrassed. He really touched the pot that didn't boil. As a bystander, of course it wasn't good to comment on this kind of thing. So Chun Shi wisely shut his mouth and let Gu Lao vent his dissatisfaction in his ears. Although Gu Lao's house was close to the tea house in a straight line, it still took about 10 minutes to walk over. Most of the houses in the neighborhood were Sihiyuan, and Gu Lao's house was naturally no exception. It was just that it wasn't a dignified two-entry Sihiyuan like the Qin family. "We're here," Gu Lao complained all the way. When he really stood in front of the door, he seemed to have thought of something. He quickly turned his head and solemnly said to Chan Shi, "Little Chun, let me make it clear to you first. I can't make you happy with this kind of thing. Yao Yao's ghost may be inside. Are you sure you want to go in with me? Since we're already here, of course we have to go in and take a look. Not to mention there's a big sun above us. Even if there's a ghost, it's impossible for it to appear at this time, right?" After saying that, Chan Shi stretched out his hand and pointed at the sun in the sky. Gu Lao looked at his finger and was suddenly blinded by the sunlight. "Okay, then let's hurry up." When we're done, we'll bring it to the tea house to eat. Seeing that the sun was shining, Gu Lao finally felt relieved. He then took out the key and opened the door of the Sihiyuan. Then, Gu Lao walked into the courtyard with Chun Shi. For some reason, the moment Chun Shi stepped into the courtyard, the sun in the sky suddenly dimmed a lot, as if a dark cloud just happened to float over and cover the sun. Gu Lao led Chun Shi straight to the main hall, and then said to Chen Shi, "Sit anywhere you want. I'll go and pour you a cup of tea first. You're always the one who invites me to tea. This time it's finally my turn to invite you," Gu Lao said as he walked out of the main hall with a kettle. After he left, Chun Shi looked at the table in the center of the main hall with interest. There were fruits and candles on the table, and next to it was a Guanyin statue. If Chun Shi guessed correctly, these tributes should be used by Gu Lao to worship Gu Yao. However, he didn't want the child to know that his mother had passed away, so he put a Guanyin statue next to it. There was an armchair on both sides of the table. From beginning to end, Gu Lao didn't look at the person on the chair. But there was a person sitting there. A woman. The woman was wearing a set of very ordinary home clothes, sitting quietly on the old-fashioned wooden armchair. If one looked carefully, one would find that her skin was terrifyingly white as paper. It was estimated that even an albino was not as white as her. What was even more strange was that the woman's eyes were pitch black, as if ink had dripped into her eyes. Chun Shi turned his head and glanced at the woman, nodded politely at her, and then smiled and greeted her. Chapter 332. Chun Shi looked at the woman in the central room with a smile. It was actually a bit inaccurate to call her a woman. After all, Gu Yao had been dead for more than half a year, and her body had long decayed. How could she be considered a human now? She should be a female ghost. Chun Shi nodded toward the chair, and after a polite greeting, the expression on the woman's face changed slightly. She looked no different from a real person. Although her eye sockets were dark and she didn't even have eyeballs, there was still a hint of surprise in her eyes. The woman stared straight at Chun Shi. After a long while, she finally moved her lips slightly. Immediately afterward, the woman's voice suddenly sounded in Chun Shi's mind. "You saw me?" Hearing this, Chun Shi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. That was interesting. It turned out that not only did Gu Yao's soul not dissipate, but for some unknown reason, she also preserved some memories of her life while stabilizing her soul body. No wonder Gu Yao had been staying with the twins, but the twins acted as if nothing had happened. It was because Gu Yao was their biological mother, so even if she became a ghost, she would never hurt her children. Chun Shi didn't answer Gu Yao's words. Instead, he stood in place and looked at her with interest. This kind of behavior was actually very impolite. Even animals had territorial consciousness, let alone ghosts. Therefore, after looking at Chun Shi for a while, the darkness in Gu Yao's eye sockets became more and more intense. It was like boiling ink, as if it could splash out of the pot at any time. Sure enough, after a few breaths of time, Gu Yao slowly flew up from the chair in a very strange way, and then looked down at Chun Shi condescendingly. If one looked carefully, they would find that Gu Yao's body was not very real. It was vaguely like a projection of a 3D holographic image. The candles in the central room were curled up with smoke. Perhaps because the lights in the room were not turned on, the originally kind Guanyin statue seemed to be covered with a layer of shadow. It looked a bit ferocious and terrifying. Suddenly, a gust of chilly wind blew past, and the sound of leaves rustling could be heard from outside the house. The sky suddenly became a lot gloomier. It was dark and oppressive, as if a rainstorm could suddenly fall at any time. "Leave. I won't kill you," Gu Yao's voice sounded again. However, after Chun Shi heard her words, he gently shook his head, and then thoughtfully turned to look outside the house. After a person dies, the 7 spirits disperse first. Then, the heaven soul returns to the heavens, the earth soul returns to the earth, and the life soul enters the cycle of reincarnation. Ghosts were formed from earthly souls, so they lacked heavenly souls and life souls. Naturally, they could not have complete personalities and thoughts like they did when they were alive. Therefore, if one wishes to deal with ghosts, one must first treat them as if they were mentally retarded. They were easily angered and irritated. At the same time, they were extremely aggressive. They would chop people up in the middle of the street if they didn't agree with them. She didn't seem to realize what he was dealing with. Therefore, the moment she turned around to look outside, Gu Yao was completely enraged by his actions and went completely berserk, accompanied by an ear-piercing scream that pierced the depths of one's soul. A strong wind suddenly blew in the central room. Gu Yao's facial expression suddenly became particularly ferocious. Her head of black hair fluttered in the wind, and her pair of pupilless eyes were constantly oozing black blood. She was an evil ghost that had just crawled out of hell. However, she seemed to be unaware of anything, and continued to look outside the house. Gu Yao had already issued a warning, but she was not moved at all. Therefore, Gu Yao completely turned into a vengeful ghost and fiercely pounced on Chen Shi. Why would people be afraid of ghosts? It was because the two of them were not on the same level, and there was no way to fight back. An ordinary person holding a Guanyin Bodhisattva from the night market, or chanting a few Amitabha, wanted to subdue an evil ghost with deep resentment. That was a plot that only existed in movies. Everything in the world had a spirit. From the moment Gu Yao turned into a ghost, she had already become a completely new life form. A life form that existed in the world in the form of energy and was very fragile. Ghosts were more likely to come into contact with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth than humans, so ordinary people could not deal with ghost attacks at all. This was because they had no idea how the ghosts were attacking them. And if humans also came into contact with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and learned how to use it, then would ghosts still be a match for humans? It was like asking a mentally disabled person to fight with a normal person. How could the former win against the latter? Unless the latter was also mentally disabled. She was clearly not mentally disabled. Moreover, his understanding of the laws of heaven and earth was far beyond the imagination of ordinary immortal cultivators. Therefore, the moment Gu Yao pounced on Chen Shi, it was as if she had crashed into a high-voltage electric net, and her entire body trembled violently. Perhaps because it was too painful, Gu Yao suddenly let out an ear-piercing scream, then suddenly turned into a cloud of gray smoke and flew back to the table in the central room at an even faster speed. Running? Seeing this, she smiled slightly, then took out the soul crystal and gently waved at the cloud of gray smoke. The gray smoke continued to churn and jump, as if it was still making its final struggle. Chapter 333. She held a teacup and chatted with Gu Lao for a while. The old man seemed to have suddenly thought of something and quickly pulled him out of the main hall. It's getting late. Let's go. It's time to cook. Looking at his anxious look, it seemed that he really didn't want Shi to stay here any longer. Seeing this, Shi just smiled and didn't say anything. However, when he followed Gu Lao out of the central room and went to the kitchen, She suddenly stopped next to the large water tank in the yard, and then began to carefully look at the water tank in front of him. This kind of water tank was very common in Shangjing Sihiyuan, which was the big water tank in Sima Guang's story of smashing a tank. The large water tank in the yard, in addition to the role of water and fire prevention, was mainly for auspiciousness. The large tank was filled with water, and water made money, which meant that the family could prosper and accumulate wealth. These were old customs, and generally only old people like Gu Lao would have this kind of thing in their house. She stood by the water tank for a while, and no one knew what he was looking at. Seeing that he didn't move, Gu Lao stood at the kitchen door and couldn't help but urge him again. Little Chen, what are you doing? It's already 4 o'clock. Let's start quickly. Okay, I'm coming. After hearing Gu Lao's urging, she had to respond with a smile, and then followed Gu Lao into the kitchen. Since he wanted to taste Gu Lao's cooking, Gu Lao naturally had to cook dinner, and she would help him prepare the dishes. Gu Lao took care of a child alone, so his cooking skills naturally wouldn't be bad. In addition, he only made some common home-cooked dishes today, so it didn't take long for a table full of dishes to fill up. Because he wanted to bring all these dishes to the tea house, Gu Lao specially found a scooter for moving goods, put all the plates and chopsticks on the scooter, and was ready to drag the scooter to the tea house. Now that it was summer, the time for the sun to set was naturally much later than before. Therefore, when She dragged the scooter out of Gu Lao's house, it was only a little over 5 o'clock, and the bright sun was still hanging in the sky with no signs of setting. Maybe because nothing went wrong. After Gu Lao locked the door, the expression on his face became a lot more relaxed. It was obviously her own home, but she made it seem like she was in a haunted house. Even cooking a meal was frightening to her. So, she smiled and joked, "You see, I'm fine, right? Gu Yao is not an evil person with grievances. Why would she turn into an evil spirit and demand lives? If she had a soul in heaven, I think she would only protect you and your child. So, you can rest assured." After hearing Shi's words, Gu Lao's face suddenly showed an expression of sudden realization. Even Qin Ruoying could not help but shake her head with a smile, and then she asked them to run slower so that they would not fall. For a moment, this small tea house was filled with laughter and cheers. It was not the first time that the three little ones had eaten together, but when they were eating, they were competing in different ways. Who could use chopsticks better? Who could eat more dishes? Who couldn't eat rice? Perhaps this was the advantage of having children together. Everything had to be compared, and under the intentional guidance of the parents, it became a healthy competition which made them more obedient. While the three little guys were stuffing themselves with food, 3A6 with Beijing plates suddenly stopped at the entrance of the tea house. Then many people got out of the 3 cars. Among these people there were men and women, and they dressed in completely different styles. Some of them were wearing loose sportswear, while others were wearing well-tailored suits. When they stood together, they didn't seem to match at all. Xiao Yuan was the head shopkeeper of the tea house, so she naturally knew how the tea house's business was. So when she saw so many people coming to the tea house, she could not help but frown, and whispered to Chen Shi, "Boss, these people don't seem to be here to drink tea." She was busy wiping the oil stains on the little one's mouth. After hearing Xiao Yuan's words, he said without raising his head, "It's okay. There are a few acquaintances," as if to prove Shi's words. As soon as he finished speaking, a man in sportswear came to the door of the tea house, and then very politely knocked on the door. "Hello, Mr. Chen." Hearing this, Shi finally raised his head. After glancing at the people outside the tea house, the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. Where was this place? This was Hohai, under the emperor's feet. Hohai was only a street away from Zongnanhai, and Zongnanhai was where Wuxia's luck was. The dragon vein of a country gathered here, so how could it be a place to breed evil spirits? Even if it was haunted, it had to be in a different place. No wonder Gu Yao's ghost did not dissipate. So, Chapter 334. For Shi, Zhonghai was a place full of memories and beautiful memories. But now, he chose to settle down in Shangjing instead of the familiar Zhonghai. One of the reasons was naturally because the spiritual energy in Shangjing was far superior to other places. One had to know that as the ancient capital of the 5 dynasties, Shangjing had always been the most important place in Wuxia. Zongnanhai was located in the center of Shangjing. It was the place where the dragon veins converged. It could be said to be a place of pure yang. Naturally, it was impossible to breed evil spirits and accept filth. Hohai was adjacent to Zongnanhai. After Gu Yao died in a car accident, her yin spirit did not dissipate. Instead, it became more and more stable and even began to condense into a soul body. This was obviously a very strange thing. Because of this, She speculated that this matter should be deliberately manipulated behind the scenes. And if he guessed correctly, this person should want to use the geographical advantage of Zongnanhai to organize Gu Yao's soul body and cultivate an extremely powerful yin servant. The yin servant did not have a physical body, so once the yin servant was formed, its combat power would naturally be far superior to cultivators of the same level, and even stronger than Shikigami. But what kind of place was Zongnanhai? The Wu Lian's influence spread throughout the country, and there were countless experts under their command. How could there be a mistake here? Japanese? Inyang Liao? How could it be? If the Japanese could cultivate servants in Zongnanhai, what was the difference between that and riding on Wuxia's head and shitting? Therefore, even if She used her but to think, she knew that this matter was definitely related to Wu Lian. It was just a thief crying out to catch a thief, and a ghost crying out to catch a ghost. Moreover, this person's cultivation level was very high, and he had a high status in the Wu Lian. Otherwise, the Wu Lian would not allow him to do this in Zongnanhai. Shi's guess was correct. From the cars outside the tea house, it was not difficult to see that these A6 with military license plates were all Wu Lian cars. She didn't know who the leader was, so he didn't answer immediately. Seeing that he didn't seem to want to drive him away, the man immediately lowered his head and said politely, "Mr. Chan, my name is Ding Changji, and I work for the General Supervision Office. The reason why I took the liberty to visit you today is because this is a very important matter, and I need to verify it with you. Can you do me a favor?" After saying that, Ding Changji bowed slightly and made an inviting gesture. Looking at his neither servile nor overbearing attitude and full of confidence, She guessed that this person should be at least at the level of a sister-in-law. Director of the Supervision Office. He was the official in charge of Suzhou City. This was getting interesting. A smile suddenly appeared on Shi's face. After glancing at Ding Chengji, he faintly said, "It's dinner time now. If you have anything to say, wait until I eat dinner first." Shi's attitude was so arrogant, but Ding Chengji's face did not show the slightest dissatisfaction. Instead, he chuckled and said, "It's my fault for disturbing you. Mr. Chen, please enjoy your meal. I'll wait for you outside." Ding Chengji looked at Shi with a smile, but Shi acted as if he didn't hear him. Even the little girl couldn't help glancing at him, and then looked at Shi with a confused face. "Open your mouth, good girl." She scooped up a bowl of rice with a spoon and sent it to the little girl's mouth. Hearing this, the little thing opened its mouth wide and swallowed the spoon in one gulp. As for Ding Chengji, who looked embarrassed, he pretended not to see it. Ding Chengji had no choice but to leave the tea house silently. No one knew what Ding Chengji said to the others outside, but after hearing what he said, they all went back to the cars. She was not an impolite person. The reason why he did that was to express his dissatisfaction. He was dissatisfied with Wu Lian. Because the two brothers liked to quarrel while eating, the meal took more than half an hour. Although Gu Lao was very curious about the relationship between Shi and the people outside, he knew what to ask and what not to ask, so he pretended not to see anything from beginning to end. After Qiao Yuan cleared the table, Shi looked at the clock on the wall meaningfully, and then showed a meaningful smile. These people waited outside for so long, but his sister-in-law didn't call. Did she not receive the news? Or did she not inform her at all? She pondered as he slowly walked out of the tea house. After seeing him go out, Ding Chengji hurriedly got out of the car, and then said politely to Shi, "Mr. Chen, you see, this is not the place to talk. Would you like to go to the office with us?" After saying that, Ding Chengji very subtly looked into the tea house, as if to say that there were ordinary people inside, so it was not convenient to talk about a lot of things here. Ding Chengji had made it very clear, but Shi had no intention of getting in the car with him. Instead, he said calmly, "If you have something to say it here. I don't have time to talk nonsense with you." As soon as Shi's voice fell, before Ding Chengji even had time to respond, a young man in a suit pushed open the car door, and then said to Shi provocatively, "Okay, then say it here." Shi glanced at the young man, ignored him, and looked at Ding Chengji. Seeing that something was wrong, Ding Chengji immediately lowered his voice and said to Shi, "Mr. Chen, this is Su Hongyi. His father is Su Feng, and he is a professor at the headquarters." Chapter 335. Scram. It was a simple word, but it accurately expressed all the thoughts in Shi's mind. He didn't even bother to look at Ding Chengji and Su Hongyi. After spitting out this word, he turned around and walked towards the tea house. Mr. Chan Yu? Seeing this, Ding Chengji couldn't help but panic. Before he could even finish his sentence, the young man behind him was like an ignited barrel of dynamite. He was so angry that he jumped up and down in an instant. Stop right there. Perhaps because he was too agitated, Su Hongyi's attitude was really bad. After Ding Chengji turned around and glared at Su Hongyi finally realized who he was talking to, so he immediately restrained his temper. He then lowered his head slightly and said with some sincerity, "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, I was rude." Su Hongyi lowered his head and apologized, but Chen Shi acted as if he didn't hear him. In the blink of an eye, he had already pushed open the tea house's door and was about to enter the house. Su Hongyi had no choice but to look at Chen Shi's back and hurriedly said, "Sir, please wait. This is very important. The ghost that you took away was a Yin servant that my father carefully cultivated. He also said that if I can't find the Yin servant, then I don't have to go back. I respect you as a senior, but I hope that for the sake of my father and Wu Lian, you won't make things difficult for a junior like me." After saying this, Su Hongyi lowered his head and bowed respectfully to Chen Shi. Face. Chen Shi finally stopped in his tracks. However, he didn't turn around. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said to Ding Chengji, "The people from the inspector's office are guarding outside every day. Don't you know that Gu Yao is Gu Qinghe's daughter? Of course we know this, but Gu Yao did die in an accident. You can verify this with old Master Gu. If that's the case, then do you know that Gu Qinghe is my friend?" As soon as Chen Shi's voice fell, Ding Chengji felt an invisible pressure suddenly attack him. It was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water over his head. In this evening, when the summer heat still lingered, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He only felt that his entire body was cold, and his hands and feet were ice cold. Ding Chengji finally understood what it meant to be imposing without being angry. After all, this person was above the celestial realm. But now that things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet and reply, "I know." After hearing his answer, Chen Shi finally turned around. He first took a deep look at Ding Chengji before shifting his gaze to Su Hongyi. After that, Chen Shi asked with a calm expression, "Gu Qinghe is my friend, but you used his daughter's soul to refine a Yin servant, so I'm puzzled. Who's the one who's not giving face?" Su Hongyi was stunned, but immediately after, he was like an actor in a Sichuan opera who changed his face. Where was the dignity of a celestial being? Where was the principle that a grandmaster should not be humiliated? Couldn't he act according to common sense? Was the script wrong? Seeing that Chen Shi had already pushed open the door of the tea house, Su Hongyi finally came back to his senses and hurriedly shouted, "Mr. Chen, my father said that if you don't hand over the Yin servant today, then the grudge is set. He will definitely pay you a visit in person another day." "Pay you a visit?" Chen Shi stopped in his tracks again. After softly repeating this word, he tilted his head slightly and said with a calm expression, "He doesn't deserve it." After saying that, Chen Shi's last bit of patience was exhausted, so he walked into the tea house without looking back. The door gently closed. Su Hongyi stood in place with a gloomy expression. After a long while, he finally spat on the ground and said coldly to Ding Chengji, "Director Ding, as you can see, it's not that we're looking for trouble. It's him who doesn't know what's going on." As he spoke, Su Hongyi waved at the car beside him. Then, someone quickly stepped forward and handed a letter to Su Hongyi. "This is a letter of challenge. Please pass it on to him." Ding Chengji took the letter of challenge, then frowned and advised, "I think this is a little inappropriate. Why don't you go back and talk to Mr. Su first? Otherwise, I can't explain it to the headquarters." Before Ding Chengji could finish, Su Hongyi waved his hand and interrupted him, then said righteously, "Director Ding, there's no need to say more. This is a private matter and has nothing to do with Wu Lian. Moreover, this Chen guy was rude first. How can my father just let it go like this?" Speaking of this, Su Hongyi suddenly turned his head and deliberately shouted in the direction of the tea house. Su Feng declares, Mr. Su was rude first. Today, I'm here to ask for forgiveness. This is well known to all Lubushel. If Mr. Su dares to accept the challenge, we'll be waiting for you at the peak of Taihang in 3 days. Think carefully. Don't regret it. After a full 10 minutes, Ding Chengji finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Young Master Su, you see, Mr. Chun hasn't given a definite answer. This matter, why don't we just leave it at that? Ah. Hearing this, Su Hongyi suddenly let out a sneer, then immediately shouted at the tea house again, Mr. Chun, I have delivered your message, and the letter of challenge has also been handed over to Director Ding to notarize. My father will be waiting for you at the peak of Taihang in 3 days. This battle will be watched by the world. I hope you won't miss the appointment, so as not to become a laughingstock. You're the most elegant person in Wuxia, so I'm sure you won't back down. If that's the case, I'll take my leave first. After that, Su Hongyi bowed to the tea house, then got in the car and left. From beginning to end, she did not give any response. However, after hearing Su Hongyi's last sentence, she couldn't help but sneer. He was being ridden on top of his head. Night. The early summer night didn't have the irritability of the day, and the sudden breeze even seeped in a slight chill. The smog in Shangjing had always been very serious, but today, it sprinkled a little bit of starlight for the first time. After the little girl finished washing up, she lay on the windowsill and looked at the stars for a while, then played with Big Head for a while. Only then did she reluctantly climb into bed under She's repeated requests. According to the usual rhythm, she would tell her 1 or 2 short stories, and then this little thing would fall into a deep sleep. But today, for some reason, after she told her 2 short bedtime stories, this little thing was still very energetic and kept crawling on Shi and Qin Ruoying. Shi had no choice but to hold her in his arms, and then gently persuade her, Nyan, be good. It's already 12 o'clock, you should rest early, and have enough energy to play tomorrow, okay? Hearing this little thing pouted and said coquettishly, I don't want to sleep. Then what do you want to do? I don't know. The little thing shook her head blankly, but then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she quickly turned her head to the end of the bed and shouted, Big cat, come here. Big Cat was lying in the corner with its eyes closed, and after hearing the little thing's shout, it quickly jumped onto the bed. Meow! Just as Big Cat meowed, the little thing hugged it in her arms, and then put it on the pillow next to her. Big Cat, it's cold outside. Don't run outside. Sleep with me. I'll cover you with a quilt. As she spoke, the little thing grabbed the cold quilt, and then, like Qin Ruoying, gently covered the big cat with the quilt. Meow! Big Cat lay on the bed and looked at the little thing with a confused expression. After this period of cultivation, it had reached the peak of wisdom, and could break through at any time, so even she did not force it to play with the little thing recently. But today, this little thing did not know what was wrong with it. In the middle of the night, instead of sleeping, it came to ask it to sleep. Did it still need to sleep? Big Cat was wondering if it should escape, but after the little thing covered it with the quilt, she gently put her little hand on it, and then imitated Qin Ruoying's tone and said, Big Cat, be good, you're the youngest, I want to take care of you, when you fall asleep, I'll sleep. These were the words Qin Ruoying usually said to her. Who would have thought that this little thing would actually apply what she learned? So, she had learned to care for others now? This was a good thing, so naturally he would encourage her. Therefore, after she glared fiercely at the big cat. It reluctantly closed its eyes, curled up into a ball next to the little thing, and pretended to be asleep. The little thing waited for a while, and when she thought that it was really asleep, she carefully covered the big cat with the quilt, and then obediently lay back on the bed. I'm going to sleep, perhaps because she had experienced the joy of taking care of others. The little thing lowered her voice and said such a sentence, and was no longer naughty, but obediently closed her eyes and fell asleep. Looking at her very loving action, the couple's faces could not help but evoke a trace of a smile. It was only after the little fellow had truly fallen asleep that the day was truly over. And at this time, Qin Ruoying looked at Chen Shi and asked softly, "Today's matter? What do you think?" Obviously, she also heard Su Hongyi's words. Qin Ruoying was very clear about Chen Shi's strength, and naturally, she was not worried about Chen Shi's safety. So she was just casually asking. Anyway, no matter what decision Chen Shi made, she would support it. "I heard that the scenery at the top of Taihang Mountain is not bad. Why don't we take Nian there to see the scenery?" "I think that's a good idea." "Then it's settled." "Okay." In a few words, the couple settled this matter, and then began to discuss how to arrange the itinerary. As for Su Feng's challenge, Chapter 337. Going north to the Taihang Mountains, how difficult is it? Sheep intestines are twisted, the wheels are destroyed. How bleak are the trees, the north wind is mournful. Cao Cao's poem, Journey of the Bitter Cold, described the magnificence of the Taihang Mountains. The Taihang Mountains started north from Shangjing and extended south to Jinzhou. The 800 miles of Taihang spanned across 4 provinces. It could be said to be vast and majestic. Because of the direction of the mountains, the Taihang Mountains were higher in the north and higher in the south. The peaks were mainly concentrated in Jizhou, not far from Shangjing. It was also because of the towering peaks in the north of Taihang that it formed a completely different landscape from the south. In the depths of the mountains, one could see cliffs that looked like they were carved by knives and axes, deep and narrow canyons, and winding rivers. The road wound up the steep cliffs, going round and gradually disappeared into the clouds. Looking down through the car window, one could see the erratic clouds in the mountains, and the lush greenery that even the fog couldn't cover. Layers of green forest, enchanting wilderness. The little girl didn't like to sit in a car because it always gave her a feeling of suffocation. Therefore, compared to a car, the little girl preferred to sit in a bus. After all, the bus was spacious and had a wide view. Sitting in the bus, one could see the beautiful scenery of the mountains. Today, they were hiking, so Qin Ruoying gave the little girl a set of children's sports clothes. Her hair was tied up in a bun, revealing a round and rosy little face. She looked particularly lively and cute. Click, click, click. The little girl sat on Qin Ruoying's lap and took pictures with her mobile phone. But she didn't have a sense of beauty, so she just took pictures for fun. As long as she heard the click-click sound of the phone, the little girl couldn't help but giggle. Come to think of it, only a child's laughter could be so innocent and crisp. She came out to play for fun, and her laughter seemed to have a strange magic that could infect the people around her. As long as he heard her crisp laughter, he would feel like he had really escaped from the city, put aside his work and worries, and enjoyed life with a natural state of mind. Therefore, even though this little thing kept on making noises throughout the journey, the other passengers in the carriage didn't find her too noisy. Instead, they would turn back to look at the couple from time to time. They didn't hide the envy in their hearts at all and kept on praising this child for being so cute. It was May 24th, Wednesday. It was an ordinary Wednesday. Because it was a working day, at least 1/3 of the seats on the bus were empty. The Taihang Mountains were very long. Basically, every province had its own scenic spots. But this time was different. The Wu Lian had no intention of blocking the news at all. Instead, he allowed it to spread throughout the country in a very short time and even the whole world. That night, countless people couldn't sleep. Even more people rushed to Taihang Mountain overnight, wanting to be the first to occupy the best viewing position in the East Terrace, hoping to see the upcoming battle with their own eyes. If they could get some inspiration from it, how would it help their future cultivation? This battle involved 2 celestial beings. One was Mr. Chun, who rose like a comet and was directly rated X by the Wu Lian. The other was Su Feng, the leader of the Yin Ghost sect who had been in charge of the Southwest for hundreds of years. Celestial beings. A battle of life and death. What kind of grand event was this? Because Mr. Chun was too mysterious, no one knew who would win this battle. To be honest, If it weren't for the unreliable rumors that spread from time to time within the Wulian, no one was optimistic about Mr. Chen's victory. But he lived up to his reputation. Since the Wu Lian admired Mr. Chen so much, there must be something special about him, and his strength should not be underestimated. Therefore, this battle could be said to be the focus of the world's attention. There was an open space at the highest point of the East Terrace, with an area of about 10 square meters, which could be regarded as an excellent viewing platform. Those who came to watch the battle were not ordinary people, but they all tacitly stood at the mountainside, at least 100 meters away from the viewing platform. No one dared to take a step forward. No one dared to talk about it. Except for the sound of the wind, not even the sound of birds or insects could be heard. It was silent. All this was because there was one person sitting on the viewing platform. He would climb to the top and look down on all the other mountains, facing this magnificent and beautiful scenery of the mountain peak. This person closed his eyes tightly and sat upright like a rock on the observation platform. He didn't move at all, but there was an incomparably strong force that kept flowing out of him, like a dark cloud on a cloudy day, weighing heavily on everyone's hearts. Finally, someone couldn't bear the pressure. After retreating a few hundred meters, he let out a long sigh of relief. Looking at the mountaintop, he couldn't help but sigh. Heavenly man, Senior Su has really reached the realm of oneness of heaven and men. Senior Su has been sitting here for 3 days, but Mr. Chan hasn't shown up. Do you think? Is he arrogant, or he doesn't dare to come at all? Then, a blue light suddenly rose. Like a meteor, it flashed over the little fellow's head, and then left a long shadow in the sky. Meteor! Meteor! I know! It's a meteor! The little fellow jumped up and down excitedly. Her clear and melodious voice reverberated throughout the valley, like a cheerful bird flying freely under the boundless sky. At the same time, East Stage, the peak of Taihang. In fact, the sun had already set. But because of the refraction of the clouds, the afterglow of the setting sun could still be seen on the mountain, giving people the illusion that the sun had not set yet. Mr. Chun did not come after all. Even if people did not want to believe it, it was the truth. He was afraid of the battle. Many people came to watch the battle with a pilgrimage mentality, but they did not expect to see such a result in the end. This was something no one had expected. From today onwards, Mr. Chen's name would become Wuxia's biggest joke. After everyone shook their heads and sighed, they finally walked down the mountain in low spirits. Only a few people were still standing in the same place, unwilling to leave. Su Hongyi stood on a large rock closest to the observation deck. When he saw the sun sink into the mountaintop, he couldn't help but smile. From this moment on, everything was different from before. Identity, status, power, as long as he, Su Hongyi, wanted it. How could he not get it? This was the real. He would climb to the top and look down on all mountains. If Su Feng was not still sitting on the observation deck, Su Hongyi would have looked up to the sky and screamed to express his excitement at the moment. Su Hongyi's excitement did not last long, because there was a sudden exclamation from the crowd behind him. Look, what is that? It looks like a meteor. Bah, no. It's a sword. A flying sword. It's so fast. It's coming. It's coming. The green light was so fast that it arrived in the blink of an eye. Like a meteor, it approached the east stage in an instant. Su Hongyi stared at the green light in a daze, and the smile on his face froze instantly. He's coming. Just as the sun was about to set and night was about to fall, a ray of green light streaked across the sky and shot straight to the peak of Taihang. Chapter 339. The sun had already set. Just when everyone thought that Mr. Chun was not going to show up, a green light suddenly pierced through the sky, leaped over the mountains, and headed straight for the east platform from the northwest. The green light shone like a comet. But when the green light approached the peak of Taihang, people suddenly realized this was not a shooting star. This was a flying sword that only existed in legends. At the peak of the mountains, a sword soared to the heavens. Swoosh, swoosh, a green rainbow pierced the sky. The long sword turned into a green light and suddenly flew over from afar. Although it was not close, it vaguely gave people a huge pressure. Its momentum was so strong that it was unstoppable. The sword was 3 feet and 3 inches long. The blade was like water, and it emitted a dense chill. It was as cold as the moonlight, and as bone-chilling as a cold lake. This long sword was the magic weapon that Shi had snatched from Bai Hong's hand. Flowing cloud. Because the long sword was flying too fast, before anyone could react, the long sword had already arrived at the peak of Taihang, and the tip of the sword was pointed straight at Su Feng, who was sitting on the observation platform. Good timing. Seeing this, Su Feng let out a long howl to the sky. Then, like a giant python that had been dormant for a long time, he suddenly soared into the sky. His black robe fluttered in the wind, and for a moment, he was like a god descending to earth, facing the flying sword in the sky. However, when Su Feng soared into the sky and was ready to face the sword, he truly felt the majestic power contained in the sword. Under the sky that was not late at dusk, twilight gradually rose, and the mountain wind raged. The sword seemed to have torn the sky apart, leaving a shallow mark in the void. Wherever the long sword went, the spiritual energy at the peak of Taihang surged toward it. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth kept converging into the sword, but it gradually increased the power of the sword. In the end, this power made Su Feng feel like he was in a trance, as if he was not facing the sword, but the entire sky. The sky had collapsed. The power of this sword was so terrifying. Su Feng's face turned cold. He did not have time to think about where this flying sword came from, and he instinctively stirred up the vitality in his body. With a loud shout, 18 servants immediately appeared beside him and formed a protective circle around him. The 18 servants took up the position of the 8 trigrams, each occupying a corner. At the same time, they continued to inject their own yin qi into Su Feng's body. In that instant, with Su Feng as the center, a shadow of the 8 trigrams suddenly appeared at the peak of Taihang, facing the green light from afar. For the past 3 days, Su Feng had been continuously absorbing the yin qi from the Taihang Mountains, pushing the 8 yin servants to their peak condition. The vast and majestic yin qi of the mountains, as well as Su Feng's hundreds of years of hard cultivation, merged into the peak of Taixing at this moment. They slowly circulated in the void, forming an indestructible 8 trigrams formation. And this was his trump card. Yin Soldier's formation, move the mountains, taking advantage of the right time, place, and people, gathering the power of the mountains, rivers, sun, moon, and yin and yang. He faced this world-shaking sword head-on. This was a powerful force that only those above the celestial being realm could control. It was also a power that ordinary people could never imagine. Therefore, no matter who won or lost in this battle, it could definitely be said to be an unprecedented battle. And the moment Su Feng revealed the Taiji diagram, the flying sword finally arrived in front of Su Feng. Like the sonic boom caused by the flight of a supersonic fighter, the moment the long sword hit the Taiji diagram, with the point of impact as the center of the circle, a burst of white air suddenly erupted, its power monstrous. The invisible air wave carried a powerful impact, instantly turning the stones on the observation deck into dust. At the same time, the air wave also uprooted all the trees on the mountain. For a moment, the peak of Taihang was filled with dust and dirt, as if it had been hit by a Force 12 typhoon. Su Hongyi was standing closest to it, so the moment the air wave hit, he was sent flying by the powerful shock wave, and then rolled along the hillside. After rolling for a few hundred meters, he finally hit a big rock and stopped. Gravel and dust constantly fell on Su Hongyi, and in a short while he was buried alive. Similar scenes kept playing out. No one had seen a battle between those above the celestial being realm, so they didn't know what the safe zone was. If it weren't for Wu Lian's consideration of not letting everyone get too close, the peak of Taihang would have been dyed red with blood today. and this was based on the situation where Su Feng flew into the sky and took the sword head-on. If Su Feng was still standing on the observation deck, this sword, wouldn't it have shaved the mountain? The lucky ones with lower cultivation were standing farther away in advance, and after the explosion they ran faster than anyone else, so they were not injured because of this. By the time they looked at the viewing area in shock, they realized that everything had already been settled. The air wave dissipated. Su Feng was still flying in the air, but his black robe was torn to shreds by the air wave, and from afar, he looked like a rag doll. As for the Taiji diagram, it had already turned into a light smoke, dissipating at the peak of Taihang. Su Feng didn't seem to be injured. That was because the flying sword suddenly stopped in the air after breaking the Taiji diagram. The blue light around the long sword had already dissipated. If it weren't for the fact that it was still floating quietly in the air, it wouldn't have looked much different from an ordinary long sword. However, although there were no visible wounds on Su Feng's body, most of his primordial qi had been shaken away. Like an old man whose body had been hollowed out, Su Feng stared blankly at this long sword that was right in front of him. He actually couldn't maintain his high void wind resistance state, falling straight down from the sky just like that. Bang! With a muffled sound, Su Feng crashed heavily into the ground. But right after that, he crawled up from the ground shakily. Su Feng half knelt on the ground, trying to raise his head. In addition to shock, fear, and fear, there was also some disbelief in his eyes. One sword. Only one sword. He couldn't even take one sword from Mr. Chun? From beginning to end, Mr. Chun had never shown his face. With only one flying sword, he had cut off half of his cultivation and completely turned him into a cripple. Su Feng stared blankly at the flying sword in the sky. Suddenly, the sword vibrated slightly. After seeing this scene, Su Feng suddenly felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The expression on his face suddenly became extremely nervous and frightened. So, after a shudder, Su Feng suddenly lay on the ground, his forehead pressed against the soil, and shouted in a trembling voice, "Thank you, Mr. Chun, for sparing my life. Thank you, Mr. Chun, for sparing my life. Thank you, Mr. Chun, for sparing my life." After Su Feng shouted 3 times, he even raised his head and kowtowed heavily on the ground 3 times. When the few martial artists who were not affected by the blast saw this scene, they were immediately dumbfounded. Even their eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. What happened just now? Su Tianren lost? And he was so scared that he knelt down and begged for mercy? This? After being stunned for a moment, a smarter guy suddenly came back to his senses and couldn't help but shout excitedly, "I understand. The reason why Chun Xian only attacked after the sun went down. That's because he didn't take Su Tianren seriously at all. Su Feng doesn't deserve to fight with him at all." Hearing this, the rest of the people suddenly had a look of realization and hurriedly nodded in agreement. Yes, that's it. But what I don't understand is, Su Tianren is also above the celestial being level, but he couldn't even take one sword from Mr. Chun. Then, what realm should Mr. Chun be in? No one could answer this question. Everyone looked at the sky again. After Su Feng kowtowed 3 times, the sword turned into a green light again and flew back along the way it came. In the blink of an eye, it completely disappeared into the horizon. The mountain wind was still whistling. But in the blink of an eye, the peak of Taihang had completely changed. Hearing this, the little fellow seemed to be a little shy. She quickly hid half of her body behind Chun Shi. After she felt that she was safe, she poked her head out and glanced at the phone screen that the little girl handed over. "Sister, don't be afraid. Look, it's just a few movements. You only need to do it once with us." The little fellow shrunk behind Chun Shi timidly. She seemed to be a little unwilling. However, Chun Shi knew the little fellow's character very well. It was not an exaggeration to say that This little fellow only needed to blink her eyes and he already knew what she was thinking. With her current reaction, it was not that she did not want to, but she did not dare. Seeing that there were people coming and going at the station, the little fellow would more or less be a little shy. In this case, Chun-Shi, as a father, naturally had to encourage her more. Just play for fun, treat it as entertainment, and train her courage at the same time. It was a good thing. Therefore, Chun-Shi squatted beside the little fellow and persuaded her for a while. Father's words were always useful, so after hesitating for a while, the little fellow mustered up her courage and nodded. Then, she walked out timidly. The movements were indeed very simple. It took a total of 15 seconds. Excluding the head and the tail, it probably took less than 10 seconds to actually jump up. Therefore, after the two girls demonstrated it in slow motion, the little fellow remembered most of it. Although she remembered the movements, she did not immediately start. Instead, she pouted and said to Chun-Shi, "Papa, you dance first. I'll dance after you." "I'll dance?" Chun-Shi looked at the little fellow helplessly, but when he saw her serious face, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying not only did not help Chun-Shi, but also added fuel to the fire. Just dance for her to see. If you don't dance, how would she dare to dance? Thus, the two girls could only stand by the roadside and watch regretfully as the money tree got further and further away from them. Although they had left, the little fellow still hadn't woken up from the extremely magical background music. Thus, she kept pestering Qin Ruoying to play music for her. Then, she started wriggling excitedly in the car. Looking at her smug look, it was probably the long-hidden nature of the country high that had been activated for a long time. Because of the delay at the station, when the family of three returned to Dongming Alley, it was already 7 o'clock in the evening. As soon as she stepped through the door, the little fellow rushed into the courtyard with her butt up, and at the same time, she kept shouting, "Big cat! Big cat! Come quickly! I'll teach you how to dance." Before the word dance left her mouth, the little fellow suddenly stopped in her tracks. After being stunned for a moment, she looked at the figure next to her and exclaimed, "Auntie, you're back?" Chun-Shi and Qin Ruoying heard the commotion in the courtyard, and they couldn't help but smile at each other. And then they crossed the Chuehua gate side by side. Wasn't the figure standing on the steps of the east wing Qin Shueching, whom they hadn't seen for a long time? His sister-in-law was still elegant, but the most eye-catching thing was her right hand. "Oh, your hand has recovered. So fast." Chun-Shi looked at Qin Shueching in astonishment. He really didn't expect her to be able to step into the golden core stage in such a short time. Although his sister-in-law's martial arts foundation was not bad, this speed of progress, it seemed a little too fast. While Chun-Shi was still puzzled, Qin Shueching calmly explained to him, "The organization recently found some rare elixirs. My qualifications are not bad, so I got the priority to use them. With the help of the elixirs, I rushed to the Heavenly Man stage in one go." "Rare elixirs?" Chun-Shi repeated it, and suddenly he had some understanding in his heart. As the spiritual chi of heaven and earth became more and more intense, some precious treasures of heaven and earth would naturally be born. With the power of Wuxia, it was not difficult to collect these rare treasures. His sister-in-law was young, had a solid foundation, and good qualifications. In addition, she was originally a great guru at the peak of the gang realm. After practicing the practice method Chun-Shi gave her, she naturally made rapid progress. Therefore, even without the help of external forces, it was estimated that she could soon break through to the Heavenly Man stage. The Heavenly Man was just a pseudo-elixir stage. Only those above the Heavenly Man could barely be regarded as the Golden Core stage. In the blink of an eye, his sister-in-law had reached the Golden Core stage. It had to be said, time really passed quickly. "You haven't been home recently. What have you been busy with?" Qin Ruoying also hadn't seen Qin Shueching for a long time. Now that she suddenly saw her back and her injuries had recovered, Qin Ruoying naturally felt happy for her from the bottom of her heart. Therefore, after handing the luggage to Chen Shi, Qin Ruoying stepped forward and pulled Qin Shueqing to talk. His wife wanted to catch up with his sister-in-law. As her brother-in-law, Chen Shi naturally didn't want to disturb them. So after taking the luggage, he asked the little fellow to go back to the room to wash her face and change her clothes. But the little fellow didn't pay attention to him. As soon as the big cat came over, the little fellow ran straight to the fish tank with the big cat in her arms. Then, under her leadership, the cat and the fish shook crazily to the music from the mobile phone. Left, right, forward, backward. The little fellow led the dance in front. The big cat squatted on the ground and waved its paws. Big Head floated in the fish tank and shook its head and tail. Looking at their silly looks, Chen Shi could only shake his head with a smile. Then, he went to the kitchen alone to prepare dinner. While cooking, Chen Shi also pondered about his sister-in-law's sudden return. Actually, even if he used his butt to think, he knew that Qin Wanqing was being used by Wu Lian again. The Wu Lian successfully made Chen Shi reveal the tip of the iceberg through Su Feng's provocation. When they finally realized Chen Shi's potential, they immediately transferred their sister-in-law back. They were afraid that Chen Shi would vent his anger on them. On the other hand, they wanted to let Chen Shi see with his own eyes that the Wu Lian would never treat his own people badly. So they let their sister-in-law get a big bargain. Otherwise, how could they let her use this kind of heaven and earth treasure, which was very helpful for cultivation? As a large organization with an official background, this kind of decision was naturally right. But this kind of behavior made Chen Shi very disgusted. If it was useful, they would hold you in high regard. If it was useless, they would immediately throw you aside. Too utilitarian. Chen Shi didn't want to deal with the Wu Lian anymore. So, he decisively put this problem to the back of his mind and turned to think about another problem. If he didn't remember wrongly, Bai Hong once said that the divine gate would open again in a month at most. And Chapter 342. Life was back on track again. It was so peaceful that not a single ripple could be felt. The only thing that made Chen Shi feel a little uncomfortable was the little girl was addicted to the phone after all. Since the last short video, the little thing wanted to play with it from time to time. Although the brothers were not naughty, they were definitely the most enthusiastic audience. They would always give the warmest applause to the little girl at the end of her performance. In the long run, it also indirectly encouraged the little girl's self-confidence, which led to her clamoring to play music on the phone at all times. Chen Shi had always been reluctant to let the little girl touch the phone, but he could not resist her reasonable request. Dancing was a good thing after all, so naturally he could only let her be. To be on the safe side, Qin Ruoying also specifically deleted most of the software on the phone, leaving only the system's music player. But how smart were the children nowadays? When Qin Ruoying put the phone aside to play music for the little girl, the brothers could not help but fiddle with it. After all, they had been yearning for magical toys like the phone for a long time. Therefore, even if Qin Ruoying had made enough precautions, she still could not stop the brothers from fiddling with it. It did not matter if they were young and illiterate. Anyway, they would always find something new. Therefore, the door to a new world was poked open by them one by one. Aunt Zhang and Gu Lao's years of suppression were finally released. For children, how fun were games. Just one look at the picture and the brothers were completely fascinated. Under the leadership of these two bad friends, the little girl was no longer naughty and became addicted to playing games on the phone. When Chen Shi found out and wanted to stop her, she started crying and throwing a tantrum on the spot, refusing to put down the phone in her hand. The phone is fun. I want to play with the phone. I don't want toys. I want to play with the phone. This time, Chen Shi was at his wit's end. Pandora's box had been opened, and it was basically impossible to close it again, unless their memories of this period were erased. But Nianyan was his daughter after all, and the child was still so young. How could Chen Shi bear to use magic to forcibly erase her memory? What's more, it was already the era of the mobile internet. Mobile phones had become a necessity in life. No matter how much one tried to prevent it, the child would come into contact with a mobile phone one day. Therefore, the only thing she could do now was to set some rules with this little thing and set a time limit for it to play every day. It's okay to play with your phone, but you have to learn self-control first. This was more important than anything else. It was precisely because of this that how to cultivate Nianyan's self-control became Qi's top priority. In order to confirm whether destroying the temple could really cut off the connection between the great world and the earth, She recently paid special attention to the fluctuation of the spirit qi of heaven and earth. June 1st, Children's Day. On this holiday that only belonged to children, the fog that covered the sky finally appeared again. The scale of the spirit qi tide this time was indeed very large. As long as it was a place with a little bit of spirit qi, there was now fog everywhere. The fog covered the sun, like a summer shower, and the whole sky was so gloomy that it seemed like it was about to drip water. She was not sure where the divine gate would appear, so after saying goodbye to Qin Ruoying, he left the tea house and then patrolled in the direction of the spirit qi surge, wanting to see if the divine gate would appear again. The fog lasted for more than an hour. She flew more than half of Wuxia, but in the end, he did not find any trace of the divine gate's appearance, and his heart immediately calmed down. The spirit qi tide had begun to weaken, and it seemed that the divine gate would not appear again. Thinking of this, Qi's heart suddenly calmed down a lot, so he turned his head and flew back to Shangjing. And just as he was about to go home, Qin Ruoying, who was playing games with the little guy in the tea house, suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. She didn't even have the time to react before a feeling of the world spinning violently surged out. The scene in front of her blurred, and Qin Ruoying seemed to have lost her strength, and she could not even stand steadily. If she had not grabbed the chair next to her in time, she would have fallen directly to the ground. Qin Ruoying had no choice but to tightly grab the back of the chair next to her, and then carefully sit down to rest for a while. After she felt a little better, Qin Ruoying frowned slightly and began to check her own situation. In any case, she was a foundation establishment stage cultivator, so how could she still feel dizzy and blurred vision? This feeling had already appeared once before, and she carefully checked for her at that time, but he did not find any problems, so Qin Ruoying did not take it to heart. But now this feeling appeared again. After all, what was the difference between this and possession? He believed that other than Qin Ruoying, there was absolutely no one in this world who would let him enter their heart aperture without reservation. She was somewhat apprehensive, because the difference in their cultivation was too great. If Qin Ruoying's divine soul was a small pond, then she was the boundless ocean. What would happen if he poured the water from the ocean into a small pond? She had never heard of such a situation, so naturally he had never seen it before. Therefore, not to mention trying it out, just imagining it made him somewhat fearful. Qin Ruoying was the most important person in his life. If something went wrong and hurt her heart aperture, she was afraid that he could only commit suicide to apologize to the world. What to do? He couldn't advance or retreat. For a moment, she was stunned. Qin Ruoying saw She's worry, so after thinking about it again and again, she said gently, don't worry so much. You see, I'm fine now. It shouldn't be a big problem. She did not immediately reply. After a long silence, he said with a dignified face, No, this matter is not simple. We must find the problem. After saying that, he wanted to use the soul crystal to check Qin Ruoying's divine soul again. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly ran over with her phone in her arms. Mama, the phone is ringing. The phone is ringing. Although she was illiterate, she could still distinguish between ringtones and music, so she ran to Qin Ruoying's side and held the phone high as if she was presenting a treasure. Qin Ruoying took the phone and found that she did not receive a phone call, but a text message. The sender was Qin Yongyan, and the content was very short. The general meaning was that he had something to do and was going out for a while, so the couple did not have to worry. Qin Yongyan had always lived in seclusion. Today he went out for the first time, which made Qin Ruoying feel a little strange. However, the elders naturally did not need to report to the younger generation, so she did not take this matter to heart. After showing it to Chun Shi, she returned the phone to the little girl. The little girl was busy playing games. She took the phone and ran out of the hall. But just after she ran 2 steps, she seemed to have thought of something. She quickly turned her head and asked with a puzzled face, "Mama, what are you doing here?" "Mama is talking to Papa about the purchase of goods." "Oh." The little girl nodded woodenly, but her legs seemed to be rooted to the ground, and she stood there motionless. With her current reaction, Chun Shi did not need to think to know that the little girl wanted them to go out and keep her company because they had not come out for a long time. This made Chun Shi feel very gratified. Games were not as important as parents. Meanwhile, East Sea, on an unknown island. Chapter 344. East Sea Immortal Mountain, Diyu Island. Diyu Island was not an isolated island, but a group of more than 10 small islands. It was like a county with more than 10 villages under its jurisdiction. 17 small islands were scattered randomly on the sea. Although the islands were not connected, they were not very far apart either. As far as the eye could see, it was all clear and transparent seawater, fine golden beaches and lush forests. This place was like a pure land that had never been polluted by industry. Everything was so beautiful. In such a paradise, it was natural that it would be flourishing and flourishing. Therefore, the residents of the island all had the same surname, Jiang. One had to know that the origin of surnames could be traced back to the birth of new humans. At that time, humans were still in a matriarchal system, so many surnames had the word woman in them. Jiang was one of the 8 great ancient surnames. Ever since the ancient cultivators left, the Jiang clansmen left on Earth had sealed themselves on Diyu Island. If not for the serious dangers of close kin reproduction and the need to inject new blood into the clan from time to time, the Jiang clan would never allow any outsiders to set foot on Diyu Island. It was precisely because the Jiang clan had followed the ancestral teachings of seclusion for so many years that the Jiang clan's inheritance was extremely complete. This had become the thing that the Jiang clan was most proud of. Just like the rumors in the outside world, they were what the ordinary cultivators were talking about. Descendants of immortals. However, due to the gradual weakening of Earth's spirit energy, even the ancient cultivators could only stay away from it, let alone these abandoned children left behind on Earth. Therefore, rather than saying that the Jiang clan was conserving their strength, it was better to say that they were struggling at death's door here. At their worst, there was not even a single immortal in the entire Jiang clan, however. This was all in the past. With the gradual recovery of spirit energy, the Jiang clan was about to welcome its most glorious moment. The current clan leader, Jiang Yuankue, was very confident about this. On this day, Jiang Yuankue was handling clan affairs in the ancestral hall of Qixia Peak when a clan disciple suddenly came to report, interrupting his train of thought. "Clan leader, someone wants to see you." "Who is it?" "This person is from the All Saints Valley. His name is Qin Yongyan." "All Saints Valley? Wasn't it destroyed long ago?" Jiang Yuankue repeated this phrase, and a faint smile appeared on his face. It was obvious that there had been some unpleasantness between Diyu Island and All Saints Valley. Jiang Yuankue pondered for a moment, then coldly said to the messenger, "It seems that those old things are really dead. Now, a junior of the young generation wants to see me? Tell him to scram." Hearing this, the messenger had an extremely awkward expression on his face. After a moment of hesitation, he said cautiously, "Sir, that person also said that he is Mr. Chen's father-in-law." "Mr. Chen?" Jiang Yuankue froze for a moment. Then he seemed to think of something, but he wasn't sure. He frowned and asked, "Which Mr. Chen?" "He's the one who soared to immortality with a single sword strike in Taihang Mountain." Jiang Yuankue was silent. After a long moment of silence, he said solemnly, "Tell him to come see me." "Yes, Patriarch." "At the foot of Qixia Peak." Qin Yongyan stood proudly in front of the mountain gate in a plain robe. Although it was called a peak, it was actually only a few dozen meters high. From afar, one could see the cornice of the ancestral shrine at the top of the mountain. Perhaps it was because no stranger had appeared on Daiyu Island for a long time. So when Qin Yongyan stood there, countless Jiang family members couldn't help but come to take a look. Qin Yongyan was like an old monk in meditation. After standing there for more than 10 minutes, the Jiang clan member who went to deliver the message hurriedly rushed over. "Mr. Qin, please come with me." Then, the man led Qin Yongyan to the square outside the ancestral shrine. Qin Yongyan had been silent the whole time, but when he arrived at the square, he set his eyes on the giant bronze cauldron. This giant cauldron All Saints Valley once had one. Qin Yongyan didn't have to wait long in the square before a man in a brown brocade robe strode out. This man looked about the same age as him, probably in his 40s, but his tone was slightly arrogant. As soon as he saw Qin Yongyan, he asked impatiently, "Tell me, why are you here?" Junior Qin Yongyan greets Mr. Jiang. Cultivators naturally couldn't be judged by their appearances. Although Jiang Yuankui's attitude wasn't good, Qin Yongyan still bowed respectfully to him. Jiang Yuankui naturally had the right to be arrogant. After all, his age and seniority were much higher than Qin Yongyan's. However, when Jiang Yuankui approached Qin Yongyan, he suddenly realized Qin Yongyan had actually stepped into the celestial being realm, which surprised Jiang Yuankui quite a bit. A junior with the surname Yong should be between 40 and 60 years old, but he had already stepped into the celestial being realm? This kind of cultivation aptitude was rare even in the Jiang family. No wonder this man dared to climb Qisha Peak alone to ask for a meeting. Jiang Yuankui frowned as he sized up Qin Yongyan. Seeing that he didn't answer, Qin Yongyan cupped his hands and bowed. He said directly, "I know that outsiders are not allowed to set foot on Daiyu Island. The reason why I came so abruptly this time is that I have a question that I would like to ask Mr. Jiang. Tell me about it." Chapter 345. The sea breeze blew over the mountains and over the treetops, gently carrying fallen leaves to the square outside the ancestral shrine. After hearing Jiang Yuankui's reply, Qin Yongyan's heart sank. He hurriedly bowed and begged, "I have also heard that the Jiang clan's secret has never been mentioned to outsiders. However, this matter concerns my daughter's life, so I have no choice but to treat it seriously. Mister, you are the leader of a clan. If you have any difficulties, this junior can understand. I only hope that sir can give me some pointers and point out a path for my poor daughter. This junior will definitely remember such a great favor in his heart at all times. Thank you for your trouble, sir." After speaking, Qin Yongyan bowed to Jiang Yuankui again. The meaning of his words was very clear. Even if Jiang Yuankui could not reveal it due to the clan rules, he could still give him some pointers. In any case, he could give him a direction to work towards. Then, he could find a solution in that direction. This request did not seem excessive, but Jiang Yuankui did not know why. After hearing Qin Yongyan's words, he responded with an expressionless face. "I already said that I cannot help you with this matter. Please go back." After speaking, Jiang Yuankui flicked his sleeves and turned to walk back to the ancestral shrine. "Sir Jiang, please stay." Qin Yongyan could not help but feel anxious. He could not help but take a few steps forward, wanting to say a few words to Jiang Yuankui. However, at this time, a young man appeared in front of him at an extremely fast speed. Then he stretched out his right hand and stopped Qin Yongyan. The clan leader's meaning is very clear. Please go back. Qin Yongyan glanced at the young man, only to discover that this young man was actually a diviner-level expert. For a moment, he was unable to advance or retreat. Qin Yongyan's face revealed a look of struggle. After hesitating for a moment, he suddenly bent his knees in front of this young man, and with a plop, he knelt on the ground. "I hope that Sir Jiang will be merciful and save my poor daughter." A diviner was actually doing such a thing. This made the young man feel a little surprised, so he could not help but look at Jiang Yuankui, wanting to hear his opinion. Jiang Yuankue stopped, but he didn't turn around. It's not that I don't want to help you, but I can't. Her fate was sealed the moment she became the Siming Xian Nu. Isn't it too late for you to regret it now? At this point, Jiang Yuankue suddenly glanced at the young man and said, Feng Yan, help me see the guest out. Yes, Patriarch. The young man called Feng Yan nodded. Then he reached out his right hand and said to Qin Yong, Mr. Qin, please go back. Qin Yongyan knelt on the ground and remained silent for a long time. In the end, he gently shook his head and said in a very lonely voice, Forget it. I have disturbed Mr. today.